The silence that followed Gideon's death was absolute, as if the world itself needed a moment to process what had just occurred. The second calamity, a being whose very existence had threatened the fundamental order of reality, lay motionless on the cracked earth, his divine fire extinguished forever. Arthur stood over the fallen figure, Luna's arms still wrapped around his neck while the crown of twilight pulsed with gentle radiance above his brow. The transformation from desperate battle to sudden victory left an almost surreal quality to the moment, like the eye of a storm where destruction paused to catch its breath. "It's over?" Luna whispered, her golden eyes reflecting both relief and awe as she gazed at the man who had become something unprecedented. "You actually did it, Arthur. You killed a calamity." Rachel was the first to break from her stunned paralysis, her legs carrying her forward on unsteady steps as the magnitude of what she had witnessed settled into her consciousness. "Arthur," she breathed, her voice carrying notes of reverence and disbelief. "That power, you've reached radiant rank. How do you feel?" she asked softly, her healing senses automatically assessing his condition and finding readings that challenged her understanding of what was possible. Arthur turned to meet her gaze, and Rachel caught her breath at what she saw there. His eyes held depths that spoke to transformation beyond simple power increase. Wisdom earned through trial, understanding forged in the crucible of impossible choice. But beneath that cosmic awareness, she could still see the man who had chosen to protect others despite every personal cost. "Different," he admitted with characteristic honesty. "Stronger, but not in the way I expected. It's like..." He paused, searching for words to describe something that existed beyond normal language. "Like I can see the connections between everything now, the balance that holds it all together." But their moment of quiet reflection was shattered as the sounds of distant battle reached their ears. The echoes of Cecilia and Reika's desperate struggle against the vampire venerables, the clash of Rose and Seraphina's coordinated assault on Evelyn, reminders that their victory was only one part of a larger conflict. Arthur's enhanced senses painted a detailed picture of the ongoing fights, his radiant rank perception allowing him to track every movement, every exchange of power across the dimensional barriers that separated the battlefields. What he saw made his jaw tighten with concern. "They're struggling," he said quietly, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with his newfound capabilities. "The vampires are stronger than expected, and Evelyn..." His expression darkened as he sensed the twisted maternal obsession driving Rose's mother to new heights of desperate cruelty. "Then we help them," Luna said with simple certainty, her arms tightening slightly around his neck. "That's what heroes do." Arthur nodded, feeling gray energy respond to his will with unprecedented ease. The crown of twilight blazed brighter as he prepared to move, reality itself seeming to bend around his intentions. But before he could act, a sound like reality tearing reached their ears. The dimensional barriers that had separated the battles were collapsing. Not through external force, but because the conflicts within them had reached levels of intensity that the constructed spaces could no longer contain. Arthur watched as the industrial wasteland where Cecilia and Reika fought the vampires began to overlay with their position, while the Garden of Nightmares where Rose faced her mother bled through from another angle. "The barriers are failing," Rachel observed with clinical detachment, though her grip on her staff tightened as she prepared for the complications that multiple concurrent battles would create. Arthur's response was to embrace his transformed nature fully. Power flowed through him as he moved with speed that transcended normal limitation, Luna's presence allowing him to access levels of grace that made impossible movement seem effortless. The crown of twilight left trails of gray radiance as they crossed the battlefield, heading toward where his allies needed him most. The scene they arrived at was one of desperate coordination pushed to its absolute limits. Cecilia's chaos magic painted the air in patterns of crimson impossibility, her witchcraft gift creating reality storms that forced the vampires to constantly adapt their approach. But even her eight-circle capabilities were being overwhelmed by opponents who had accumulated power across centuries of existence. Reika moved like liquid lightning, her cursed script blazing across every inch of exposed skin, while the martial king's sword art carved through space with devastating precision. But the vampire's domain expansions created overlapping realities that challenged even her enhanced capabilities, forcing her to fight on multiple conceptual levels simultaneously. Two of the vampire venerables still stood, Vex and Nira, their predatory forms weaving between attacks with grace that spoke to accumulated experience. The third, Thane, lay motionless nearby, his massive frame bearing the marks of techniques that had pushed both women beyond their normal limits. But it wasn't enough. Arthur could see the signs of impending collapse in both his allies. The way Cecilia's chaos magic was beginning to fluctuate, how Reika's script-enhanced movements carried the minute tremors of someone approaching exhaustion. "Your turn to rest," Arthur said quietly, his voice carrying across the battlefield with supernatural clarity. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both vampires turned toward him with expressions that shifted rapidly from predatory anticipation to genuine alarm as they registered what stood before them. The crown of twilight marked him as something beyond their understanding, while Luna's presence added harmonics to his power that made their enhanced senses recoil. "Radiant rank," Vex breathed, his pale features reflecting the first fear he had experienced in centuries. Arthur's response was to move with casual precision that redefined what the vampires thought they understood about speed. Nixthar appeared in his hands wreathed in gray energy that made the very air sing with potential, while Luna's golden eyes tracked the vampire's positions with predatory focus. First movement, God Flash. This was the first sword movement Arthur created in this world, a movement of pure light. But now it was different. The strike didn't just carry devastating force. It carried conceptual weight, the idea of division made manifest through blade work that transcended normal classification. Nira's shadow manipulation, which had allowed her to remain effectively untouchable throughout the previous battle, simply ceased to function. The gray energy flowing through Arthur's technique asserted that shadows were not separate from light, that opposition itself was an illusion to be transcended. She materialized with a scream of shocked agony as Arthur's blade found her heart, gray energy flowing through the wound to sever her connection to the miasma that had sustained her for millennia. Unlike conventional death, this was transformation, not destruction of her existence, but liberation from the corruption that had defined it. Vex's response was immediate flight, his form dissolving into crimson mist that sought to escape through the dimensional fractures still present from the collapsing barriers. His survival instincts, honed across centuries of predation, recognized that facing Arthur in direct combat would result in nothing but annihilation. A crimson thread appeared in front of him, warding off Arthur's influence. His face scrunched, but he looked another way. Meanwhile, the sounds of Rose and Seraphina's battle reached a crescendo that spoke to a conflict approaching its inevitable conclusion. Arthur's enhanced perception tracked the exchange with perfect clarity. Blue roses meeting black in displays of power that challenged the fundamental nature of reality, while ice and corruption clashed in patterns that painted the air with impossible colors. But even as Rose's paradox gift gained the upper hand, transforming her mother's weapons into protective energy while Seraphina's sword work carved through Evelyn's defenses, the cult leader prepared one final, desperate gambit. Arthur moved with speed that collapsed distance into irrelevance, arriving just as Evelyn triggered a teleportation spell that should have carried her to safety. Should have, but didn't account for someone who could perceive the connections between all things. Gray energy lashed out like a living thing, not to harm but to reveal, stripping away the illusions that concealed Evelyn's escape route, while Luna's presence added weight to Arthur's will that made reality itself pay attention. Evelyn materialized barely a dozen feet away, her perfect composure finally cracking as she found herself face to face with the transformed Arthur. The possessive obsession that had driven her to new heights of cruelty withered under the weight of his attention, while the crown of twilight cast shadows that seemed to reveal the emptiness at her core. "Impossible," she whispered, her voice carrying notes of genuine terror as she stared at power that operated beyond her understanding. "No one should be able to." "Like a cockroach," Arthur interrupted with quiet disgust, his eyes reflecting judgment that transcended personal animosity. "Scurrying away when the light gets too bright, always finding some dark corner to hide in." But even as he prepared to end her threat permanently, spatial tears opened around Evelyn's position. Not her own magic, but external intervention from whatever remained of her cult's infrastructure. Hands reached through the dimensional rifts to drag her to safety, while voices chanted spells that prioritized her survival over everything else. "This isn't over," she snarled as the tears began to close, her maternal obsession with Rose still burning in her eyes despite the terror that Arthur's presence had inspired. "I will have my daughter back, no matter what it costs." "Yes, it is," Arthur replied with finality that made the air itself seem to thicken. "You just don't know it yet." The spatial tears sealed themselves, leaving only the lingering scent of corruption and the knowledge that some threats required more than a single confrontation to fully resolve. Arthur turned back toward his gathered allies, feeling the weight of what they had accomplished settling into his consciousness. The second calamity was dead. The immediate threats had been neutralized or driven off. For the first time in months, they could breathe without the constant pressure of impending apocalypse. "It's over," he said quietly, Luna's arms still around his neck while the crown of twilight pulsed with gentle radiance. "We won." The words carried across the battlefield with supernatural clarity, reaching every corner of the dimensional space that had contained their conflicts. Victory, earned through sacrifice and determination and the refusal to accept that limitations were absolute. The second hero had been born from the ashes of the second calamity, and the world would never be the same. Fire trailed behind Dia's blade as she carved through another wave of shadow seekers, the red flames born from her gift consuming the dark creatures with prejudicial efficiency. Her engagement ring caught the light of her own flames as she spun through the hostile ranks, each movement a dance of destruction that spoke to years of training at the Southern Sea Sun Palace. "Do you think the war is going well in the West?" she asked between strikes, her golden eyes finding Lucifer even as her sword continued its deadly work. The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity, concern for Arthur, for the outcome that would determine the fate of their world. "Arthur will handle it," Lucifer replied with quiet confidence, his own blade moving through shadow seekers like they were made of mist. Where Dia's flames consumed, his strikes simply unmade, existence ceasing wherever his sword touched. "He's stronger than any of us realized." Dia's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Lucifer caught it anyway. "We should have gone to support him," she said softly, her voice carrying notes of guilt that made his heart tighten. "Seola agreed with me, you know?" Lucifer paused in his assault long enough to reach out and caress her cheek, his verdant eyes meeting her golden gaze with infinite tenderness. "We are needed here, dear. The northern continent burns while we speak, and only we can stop it from spreading further." The moment of intimacy was brief but profound, a reminder of what they fought to protect. Not just abstract concepts of justice or duty, but the life they were building together, him, Dia, and Seola, bound by love that transcended conventional limitations. "Arthur will take care of the second calamity," Lucifer continued, his sword resuming its deadly dance. "We need to take care of our own responsibilities." They pressed deeper into the Umbervale Covenant's stronghold, cutting through waves of shadow seekers with coordinated precision that spoke to countless hours of shared training. The cult's fortress was a monument to architectural impossibility. Modern materials twisted into medieval designs, creating something that belonged neither to past nor present but to the dark spaces between. Corridors stretched beyond normal dimensions, lit by flames that cast no shadows while simultaneously being devoured by darkness that reflected no light. The very walls seemed to pulse with malevolent awareness, as if the structure itself had been infected by the same corruption that drove its inhabitants. "How many more floors?" Dia asked as they reached another stairwell, her red sun flames flickering higher as she sensed the increasing concentration of hostile entities above them. "3, Lucifer answered, his enhanced senses painting a detailed picture of the fortress's layout. "The cult leader waits at the top, along with whatever power he's been drawing strength from." They ascended through opposition that grew more sophisticated with each level. Simple shadow seekers gave way to cultists wielding corrupted artifacts, then to enhanced beings whose forms had been twisted beyond human recognition through exposure to whatever entity the Umbervale Covenant served. But none of it mattered. Dia's flames burned through corruption like purifying starlight, while Lucifer's blade cut through defenses that should have been absolute. They were a force of nature given human form, unstoppable in their advance toward the source of the continent's suffering. The final chamber stretched before them like a throne room designed by madmen. Shadows moved independently of their sources, while the very air seemed thick with anticipation that bordered on hunger. At the center of the space, a figure sat on a throne carved from what looked like crystallized darkness. But it wasn't the throne's occupant that drew Lucifer's attention. It was the emptiness surrounding him, the sense that whatever had given this place meaning was absent, leaving only hollow ceremony and desperate posturing. "Cael Nyctheris?" Lucifer called out, his voice carrying across the chamber with supernatural clarity. "Come out and face judgment for what you've done to this continent." The figure on the throne rose with fluid grace. Cael Nyctheris, the Shadow Emperor, moved like darkness given human form, his pale features carrying the kind of predatory beauty that marked someone who had embraced corruption without reservation. "How dare you?" Cael said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the shadows around him writhe with sympathetic agitation. "How dare you challenge me when you haven't even reached radiant rank? Where is your father?" His form blazed with dark energy as he prepared to demonstrate exactly why he had earned his epithet. Shadow constructs began to manifest around him. Not simple absence of light, but predatory entities that sought to devour everything they touched. But Lucifer didn't even look at him. Instead, his verdant eyes scanned the chamber with the kind of analytical precision that spoke to someone searching for what truly mattered. "Where is the shadow you worship?" he asked with casual disregard for Cael's display of power. "The entity that gives your pathetic cult meaning? Or are you so weak that it doesn't bother to show itself?" Cael's perfect composure cracked at the dismissal, rage flaring in his dark eyes as he realized he was being treated like an inconvenience rather than a threat. "You insolent!" His words dissolved into action as he channeled everything into a preemptive strike. Mana and miasma erupted from his position in waves that carried enough force to level city blocks, while shadow constructs swarmed toward Lucifer with predatory hunger that promised devastation. Lucifer's response was to draw his sword with casual precision. The blade moved in a simple horizontal cut that seemed almost lazy in its execution. But where it passed, Cael's overwhelming assault simply ceased to exist, not blocked or redirected, but negated at the fundamental level. Mana, miasma, and shadow constructs alike dissolved like mist before dawn. As the last echoes of Cael's attack faded into nothingness, something unprecedented began to manifest above Lucifer's head. Two crowns materialized simultaneously, one blazing with white radiance that spoke to purity beyond mortal comprehension, the other pulsing with black energy that carried the weight of infinite depth. They floated side by side above his brow, neither dominating the other but existing in perfect harmony that defied conventional understanding. The yin-yang body that defined Lucifer's nature had reached its ultimate expression. White mana and black mana flowed through him in patterns that created balance not through compromise, but through the transcendence of opposition itself. His presence filled the chamber like a force of nature, power radiating from him in waves that made even the corrupted architecture seem to recoil in acknowledgement of something beyond its classification. This wasn't just increased strength, it was fundamental transformation that rewrote the rules governing what was possible. "You are not my match," Lucifer said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that made reality itself seem to bend around his words. The dual crowns pulsed with synchronized rhythms that spoke to forces operating beyond normal limitation. Cael staggered backward, his dark eyes reflecting something that might have been genuine terror, as he finally understood the magnitude of what stood before him. The Shadow Emperor, who had dominated the northern continent through centuries of accumulated power, found himself reduced to nothing more than a frightened man in the presence of true transcendence. But before he could respond, before he could flee or beg or make whatever desperate gambit his fear suggested, the chamber filled with presence that dwarfed even Lucifer's transformed state. Darkness flowed into the space like a living thing, but this wasn't simple absence of light. This was shadow given consciousness, predation refined into something approaching divinity. The temperature dropped by degrees that had nothing to do with physics, while the very air seemed to thicken with malevolent awareness. The king of shadow seekers materialized at the chamber's center, his form a constantly shifting amalgamation of darkness and hunger that challenged the eye to focus on any single detail. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of eons spent consuming light wherever it dared to shine. Lucifer Windward, the entity said, and the name carried recognition that spoke to history stretching back beyond mortal memory. Another one of the cursed Windwards, eh? Lucifer's expression remained perfectly composed as he faced the being whose very presence made the chamber's corrupted architecture seem wholesome by comparison. The dual crowns above his head pulsed brighter, white and black mana flowing through him in patterns that created stability in the face of absolute predation. Lucifer raised his blade, white and black mana flowing along its edge in patterns that made the very air sing with potential energy. The dual crowns blazed brighter as he prepared to demonstrate exactly what transcendence meant when applied with surgical precision. "It's time to end this ill-fated relationship," he said with finality that made even the king of shadow seekers pause in acknowledgement of what was coming. The chamber fell silent as the king of shadow seekers materialized fully, his form a constantly shifting amalgamation of darkness that seemed to devour light wherever it touched. Beside him, Kale Nyctherus straightened with renewed confidence, the Shadow Emperor drawing strength from his master's presence. "2 against 1, Kale observed with predatory satisfaction, his earlier fear replaced by arrogance. "Even with your newfound power, you cannot hope to face both of us." Lucifer didn't respond, his verdant eyes analyzing both opponents with clinical precision. The god's eyes gift painted detailed information across his consciousness. The flow of miasma through Kale's enhanced form, the way shadow constructs drew power from the cult leader's life force. More importantly, he could perceive the parasitic connection between the Shadow Emperor and his master, a bond that had sustained the Umbervale Covenant for decades. The king of shadow seekers defied easy categorization, existing simultaneously as pure shadow and predatory intelligence. His power operated on low radiant rank, but achieved through consumption rather than understanding, strength gained by devouring rather than transcending. "You possess remarkable clarity for one so young," the Shadow King mused, his voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber's walls pulse with sympathetic darkness. "Do you truly believe you can face both of us and emerge victorious?" Lucifer's response was to draw his blade completely, the steel singing as it cleared its sheath. The weapon hummed with anticipation as sword unity flowed between them. Not the perfect transcendence Arthur had achieved, but harmony refined through countless hours of practice. The blade became an extension of his will, responding to thoughts before they fully formed. White and black mana flowed along the edge in patterns that created perfect balance, neither dominating the other but existing in harmonious opposition that spoke to his yin-yang body's fundamental nature. His first strike came without warning, a simple thrust that channeled ice magic through the blade's edge. But this wasn't traditional elemental manipulation. Where ice formed the foundation, fire followed immediately after, creating thermal shock that turned defensive barriers into explosive fragments. Wind carried the assault forward with surgical precision, while earth magic reinforced his stance to handle the recoil forces. The attack struck both opponents simultaneously. Kale met the assault with shadow constructs that sought to absorb the elemental barrage, his radiant rank power weathering forces that would have obliterated lesser beings. But the king of shadow seekers flowed around the attack like liquid darkness, his form adapting to exist in the spaces between ice and fire. "Domain expansion, equilibrium manifest," Lucifer declared, his power reshaping the chamber according to his will. The corrupted architecture transformed into something that reflected his dual nature. Half the space blazed with white radiance that purified everything it touched, while the other half pulsed with black energy that added weight and substance to his techniques. Where the two halves met, perfect balance created zones where his elemental manipulation reached transcendent levels. Within this domain, his capabilities multiplied exponentially. The Shadow King's tendrils, which had flowed like living predation, suddenly found themselves possessing mass that made evasion impossible. White mana purified the miasma that sustained them, while black mana gave them enough substance to be targeted by his elemental techniques. Kael attempted to exploit what he perceived as an opening, the Shadow Emperor moving with speed that transcended normal limitation. His blade, wreathed in concentrated miasma, sought to cut through the boundary between the domain's light and dark halves. But Lucifer's god's eyes had already tracked the attack's path, his enhanced perception allowing him to see not just the blade's trajectory but the conceptual weight it carried. His response flowed through sword unity with liquid precision. His horizontal slash met Kael's assault with forces that challenged the chamber's foundations. Ice magic created absolute stillness at the point of impact, while earth magic provided immovable resistance. Fire followed to redirect kinetic energy, while wind and water worked together to dissipate the overflow. The integration of white and black mana made the defense truly devastating. White mana asserted that light existed in all spaces, making Kael's shadow-cutting technique meaningless, while black mana added conceptual permanence that transformed defense into immutable law. Kael's blade shattered against forces he couldn't comprehend, the Shadow Emperor staggering backward with shock written across his pale features. His weapon, forged from compressed miasma and enhanced with decades of accumulated power, had been casually negated by someone barely past adolescence. "Impossible," he breathed, staring at the fragments with disbelief. "How could you? Because you never understood what power actually means?" Lucifer replied quietly, his blade already tracing new patterns in the air. The King of Shadow Seekers had watched with predatory intelligence, recognizing that direct assault would prove futile. His response was to manifest his own domain expansion, reality alteration that turned the space into an extension of his fundamental nature. Domain expansion, eternal hunger. Every surface became a mouth seeking to devour, while the air turned into digestive fluid that sought to break down anything it contacted. This wasn't just an attack. It was the transformation of local reality into a predator's paradise where consumption was the only law. But Lucifer's domain proved superior in both scope and sophistication. Where hunger tried to devour, his equilibrium imposed balance. Where corruption sought to spread, his purification cleansed. The two domains ground against each other like opposing weather systems, reality warping under the pressure of conflicting principles. Within the contested space, Lucifer moved like liquid lightning. His blade carved through the Shadow King's manifestations with surgical precision, each strike channeling different elemental combinations through sword unity's perfect harmony. Lightning followed by ice to create thermal shock. Fire and earth to generate explosive force. Wind and water to carry attacks beyond their normal range. The King of Shadow Seekers adapted quickly, his form flowing between states of matter to avoid techniques that should have been unavoidable. But Lucifer's god's eyes tracked every transition, predicting movements before they began, while his domain provided the tactical advantages necessary to exploit those predictions. A thrust wreathed in white mana pierced through the Shadow King's defenses, the purifying energy burning away portions of his essence that couldn't regenerate. The entity's scream echoed across dimensions as he experienced genuine damage for the first time in decades. Kael, weaponless but desperate, channeled everything into a final assault. Miasma erupted from his position in waves that carried enough force to level city blocks, while shadow constructs swarmed toward Lucifer with predatory hunger. But without his blade, the Shadow Emperor was simply another target. Lucifer's horizontal slash carried every element in perfect integration. Ice and fire creating pressure waves, earth and wind adding kinetic force, water and lightning providing conductivity for energies that existed beyond physical classification. The technique cut through Kael's assault like it was morning mist, continuing on to carve through the cult leader's enhanced form. White mana severed his connection to the miasma that sustained his power, while black mana ensured the separation was permanent. Kael collapsed without ceremony, his radiant rank enhancement bleeding away as his bond to corrupted power dissolved entirely. The King of Shadow Seekers, weakened by Lucifer's earlier strike, attempted to flee through dimensional rifts that would carry him beyond immediate pursuit. But Lucifer's domain had already accounted for such tactics. His final strike existed in multiple states simultaneously. Ice that froze the escape routes, fire that cauterized dimensional wounds, earth that provided immovable anchors. Wind carried the attack beyond normal range, while water and lightning added energies that transcended physical limitation. White and black mana flowed together in the technique's core, not combining but creating the space where all possibilities could be addressed simultaneously. The strike cut through not just the Shadow King's physical form but through the concepts that allowed his existence to continue. The entity simply ceased, not destroyed but transformed back into natural shadow, consciousness and hunger purged by forces that operated beyond his ability to resist. Silence fell over the chamber as the last echoes faded into stillness. Where two Radiant rank entities had stood, only empty space remained, cleansed by techniques that had operated beyond their ability to comprehend. Lucifer lowered his blade slowly, the dual crowns above his head settling into gentle radiance. Around him, the chamber began to collapse as the miasma that had sustained the Umbervale Covenant's stronghold lost its source. Dia appeared at his side, her golden eyes reflecting pride and relief in equal measure. "Is it over?" "Here, yes," he replied, taking her hand as they walked from the collapsing stronghold. "The northern continent is free." Behind them, the fortress crumbled into rubble that would be reclaimed by nature within months. Another source of corruption eliminated, another threat to innocent lives removed from existence. "Two down," Lucifer said quietly, thinking of the 5 major cults that had plagued the world. 3 to go. The Savage Communion's fortress crumbled behind me like a house of cards caught in a hurricane, its supposedly impregnable walls reduced to smoking rubble in less than an hour. What should have been a months-long siege had become little more than a casual stroll through their defenses. My newfound Radiant rank power turning their most dangerous stronghold into an afternoon's work. Dust and debris swirled in the air, carried by the wind that still hummed with the echoes of my gray energy blasts. The ground was littered with shattered stone and twisted metal, remnants of barriers that had held back armies for centuries. Now they were nothing. "Well," Luna said with satisfaction rippling through our bond. "That was disappointingly easy." I had to agree. The cult that had been terrorizing the Western continent for centuries, requiring coordinated efforts from the entire continent just to contain, had folded like wet paper the moment I decided to intervene. The crown of twilight pulsed gently above my head as I surveyed the destruction, gray energy still cascading around me in patterns that made the very air shimmer with controlled power. "Daddy!" The voice made me turn instantly, my enhanced perception having already detected the familiar presence approaching at high speed. A small figure was running toward me across the battlefield, dark hair streaming behind her as she navigated the rubble with practiced ease, jumping over chunks of stone like it was a playground game. Stella crashed into me with the kind of desperate tackle that only an 11-year-old could manage, her arms wrapping around my waist with surprising strength while her face pressed against my chest. "You're back. You're back." I was so super worried. Like, what if you got hurt or something exploded wrong? "But you won. You totally won. Breathe, little star," I said softly, chuckling as I gently adjusted Luna's position so I could properly hug my adopted daughter. The Chelan had shifted into her adult human form moments ago, amethyst hair flowing like silk, golden eyes gleaming with quiet amusement, and was nuzzling against my shoulder with that familiar, affectionate warmth. She understood family bonds better than most, her loyalty extending to the child who meant so much to me. "I'm fine. More than fine, actually. See? Not a scratch." Stella pulled back to look at me, her dark eyes wide and sparkling with that mix of kid wonder and smart kid curiosity. "You feel all different. Like way stronger. Did you get new powers? Tell me, was it super cool? I bet it was exploding everywhere." "A lot happened," I admitted, ruffling her hair while feeling Luna's amused contentment through our bond. "I'll tell you everything later, promise. Over ice cream or something fun." "Yay! Ice cream!" Stella bounced a little, her grin huge and toothy, like any normal kid who just survived a war and was ready for treats. "Arthur." The familiar voices drew my attention to the group approaching across the battlefield. Rachel, Cecilia, Rose, Serafina, and Reika were making their way through the rubble with expressions that mixed satisfaction with relief. Serafina reached us first, her silver hair catching the afternoon light as she moved with the kind of controlled grace that marked her cadence always. "Arthur," she breathed, her voice carrying notes of awe mixed with relief. "The transformation is complete, isn't it? True radiant rank, not just the threshold." "It is," I confirmed, smiling as I kept one arm around Stella. "How do you feel about having a fiancé who could accidentally level a city if he sneezed wrong?" But as they got closer, I noticed their eyes flicking to Luna, who was still in her human form, nuzzling a bit closer to my neck with that soft, purring contentment. Her amethyst hair brushed against my cheek, and her golden eyes half-closed in relaxed bliss. The girlfriends exchanged glances, subtle at first, but then Cecilia's crimson eyes narrowed. Rachel's blue ones flashed with a hint of possessiveness. Rose's EUs slightly widened like she was calculating something dramatic. Serafina's posture stiffened ever so slightly, and Reika's expression turned into a quiet frown. Arthur," Cecilia said, her voice laced with that chaotic edge, crossing her arms. "Who's the new accessory? And why is she all cozy like that?" "Yeah," Rachel added, trying to keep her tone light but failing a bit, her warmth dimming into something sharper. "We were worried sick, and now, this." Rose chimed in, her practical mind kicking in. "Generally speaking, bonding with a Chelan doesn't usually involve nuzzling in public." Serafina and Reika didn't say anything, but their looks spoke volumes. Jealousy bubbling up like a pot about to boil over. Luna, sensing the tension through our bond, lifted her head and smirked at them, her golden eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, please, as if something like that could ever happen in the first place. I'm bonded to him, not whatever you're imagining." She sighed, her voice smooth and teasing, diffusing the moment with that effortless Chelan charm. The girls blinked, then burst into reluctant laughter. Cecilia shook her head, grinning. Fine, but next time, warn us before the nuzzling show." Terrified and aroused in equal measure, Cecilia continued from earlier, recovering with her characteristic directness, her crimson eyes bright with the kind of chaotic joy that marked successful violence. "Watching you casually demolish an entire cult infrastructure was deeply educational. Also deeply satisfying, considering how much trouble those bastards have been causing. The economic implications are staggering," Rose added with the kind of practical analysis that made her invaluable for strategic planning. "A single individual capable of ending continental-level conflicts in hours rather than years. The geopolitical ramifications will reshape how nations approach everything from diplomacy to resource allocation." "Please don't overthink it," Rachel said with gentle amusement, her deep blue eyes reflecting warmth as she looked at me, the jealousy fading into fondness. "He's still Arthur, just significantly more Arthur than before." Reika nodded with characteristic precision. "Arthur will always be Arthur. The savage communion is finished," came Jin's voice as he approached with diplomatic composure that couldn't hide genuine relief. He was walking beside a young woman, his sister, Rin, whom I'd cured of her innate miasmic corruption years ago as part of our mana oath. She looked healthier now, her once pale skin glowing with vitality, her eyes clear and bright. With their primary stronghold destroyed and their leadership eliminated, the remaining cells are either surrendering or scattering beyond our borders. He paused, studying me with the kind of analytical attention that came from years of diplomatic training. "When we felt your power manifest earlier today, every mage on the continent stopped what they were doing. The resonance was unprecedented." "I imagine it was," I replied, remembering how the crown of Twilight's appearance had made reality itself pause in acknowledgement. "But the important thing is that it's over. The Western continent is secure." "More than secure," Jean continued, and I could hear genuine gratitude breaking through his diplomatic reserve. "Arthur, I need to thank you, not just for ending the war, but for keeping your promise. The mana oath we made years ago, curing Rin, taking down the cult. You've saved us all." Rin stepped forward then, her voice soft but steady, carrying the weight of someone who'd stared down her own personal hell. Arthur, thank you again. But more than for curing me, for saving the entire continent from the second calamity. If it wasn't for you, everything would be gone. My family, my home. You stopped it before it could even begin. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to, I said gently, reaching out to clasp her shoulder. Seeing you healthy and free is enough. That's what promises are for. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and nodded before stepping back beside Jean. Arthur, you magnificent bastard. Callie's voice carried across the battlefield with characteristic directness, though there was genuine affection beneath the crude enthusiasm. She approached with the kind of swagger that spoke to someone who just watched their greatest enemies receive exactly what they deserved, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured expressively. You kept your promise, she said, her usual sarcasm replaced by straightforward gratitude. About my family's art. When you started tearing through their defenses like they were made of paper, the chaos gave me exactly the opening I needed to recover what they'd stolen from us. Centuries of knowledge, back where it belongs. I owe you big time. The genuine appreciation in her voice made something warm spread through my chest. This was why power mattered, not for its own sake, but for the ability to keep promises to people who mattered. The mana oaths that had seemed so daunting when I'd made them were finally being fulfilled, one by one. Callie punched my arm lightly, grinning. Don't get all sappy on me now. But yeah, thanks. The Western continent's houses are already sending formal thanks, Jean added with diplomatic precision, though I suspect they're also recalculating every political equation they've been working with. Individual power on this scale changes everything. Let them recalculate, I said with quiet confidence. As long as they remember that power exists to protect people, not to dominate them. Daddy! Stella tugged on my shirt with the kind of insistent excitement that only kids have, her eyes lighting up like stars. We should celebrate, like, with cake and games and everything. I missed you so much, and now you're super strong, and everyone's safe. I'm here, I said simply, gathering her closer while Luna shifted back to her Chelan form with a soft glow, curling around us protectively. The girlfriends gathered in too, their hands touching my arms, shoulders. Rachel's gentle squeeze, Cecilia's playful nudge, Rose's thoughtful pat, Seraphina's elegant brush, Reka's firm grip. Jean and Rin stood nearby, smiling, and Callie lingered with her arms crossed but her expression soft. And I'm not going anywhere, I continued. The war is over, the promises are kept, and everyone I care about is safe. Good, Stella said with satisfaction, then grinned with the kind of mischievous joy that reminded me why she was the best thing that had ever happened to me outside of combat. Because I have like 17 different projects to show you. There's this one with math stuff for magic. Rose says it could make everything faster, like delivering food super quick across the whole continent. And I drew pictures of it too. I think, I replied, looking around at the faces of everyone who mattered most to me. Stella bouncing with enthusiasm, my 5 girlfriends radiating relief and affection now that the jealousy had melted into shared warmth. Jean and Rin showing quiet gratitude for promises finally kept and a calamity averted. Callie smirking but content. Luna's golden eyes reflecting contentment through our bond. That sounds like the perfect way to spend the rest of our lives. Behind us, the ruins of the Savage Communion continued to smolder, their threat finally eliminated after years of terrorizing innocent people. Around us, the people I cared about most gathered close with expressions of satisfaction and relief. Above us, the crown of twilight pulsed with gentle radiance that promised power sufficient to protect everything that mattered. Arthur, there must be a proper celebration banquet for this, King Valen insisted yet again, his regal bearing unable to hide the genuine gratitude in his voice. The Western continent's monarch had been making this request with increasing urgency since I'd returned from the Savage Communion's stronghold. After what you've accomplished, defeating the second calamity, ending the cult war, saving countless lives, the world needs to witness this moment properly. I rubbed the back of my head, feeling the weight of ceremony settling around me like an uncomfortable cloak. But now was different. Yes, I nodded, surprising everyone within earshot. You're right. 2 of the 5 major cults in the world have fallen. The Savage Communion and now the Umbervale Covenant are both destroyed. We should celebrate accordingly. Stella immediately perked up at my words, her dark eyes sparkling with the kind of excitement that only an 11-year-old could manage. Daddy, you really are the second hero now, she said happily, practically bouncing on her toes. Like, officially, with titles and everything. I reached down to pat her head gently, noting how Luna smiled at Stella's enthusiasm from her position beside us. I suppose I am Little Star, though I'm not sure how I feel about the paperwork that probably comes with it. Oh, there will definitely be paperwork, Rose said with the kind of professional precision that made everyone wince slightly. Diplomatic recognition, formal alliance structures, trade agreement modifications, security protocol updates. The administrative implications of your new status are considerable. Thanks for that encouraging thought, I replied dryly, though I caught Rachel's slight movement beside me, her shoulders touching my arm in a gesture that seemed casual but carried underlying tension. King Valen nodded at my acceptance with a slight smile. Excellent. I'll have the palace staff begin preparations immediately. This will be a celebration worthy of history. He paused, his royal composure slipping just enough to show the father beneath the crown. Thank you once again, Arthur, for saving the continent, for curing my daughter, for proving that heroes still exist in this world. You have my eternal gratitude, second hero. The formal bow he offered carried weight that transcended mere ceremony. A king acknowledging someone whose individual power had reshaped the political landscape of an entire continent. As Valen turned to leave, already calling for his advisors to begin organizing what would undoubtedly be the social event of the decade, I felt Rachel's tension more. Why are you worried? I whispered to her, letting my words carry through carefully controlled manna directly to her ears. Not worried, she shook her head, though her sapphire eyes reflected something more complex than simple concern. It's just, Father should have told me they were planning to invade the Umbervale Covenant. At least Lucifer should have called me about it. Understanding dawned as I processed her words. While I'd been fighting Gideon, Lucifer had apparently launched his own campaign against the Northern Continent's cult. Another major victory happening simultaneously with mine, but one that Rachel, despite being both princess and saintess of the North, had been excluded from. Did you want to fight for your continent? I asked carefully, meeting her sparkling sapphire eyes and noting how the golden flecks within them seemed to intensify with her emotions. She shook her head immediately. No, you needed me here. They clearly didn't need me. Lucifer handled it perfectly on his own. It would have just been nice to be included in the discussion as their princess and saintess. To know what was happening in my homeland while I was here supporting you. The hurt beneath her words was subtle but real. Rachel had given up her role in her continent's affairs to support me, but being completely excluded from major decisions still stung. She'd chosen me over her duties, but that didn't mean she wanted to be treated as if those duties had never mattered. Well, you are my saintess too, you know? I said with a smile that I hoped conveyed how much her support had meant. And you saved me, Rachel. Not just you. All 5 of you did your part perfectly. Without any of you, the fight against Gideon would have been impossible. He's right, Cecilia interjected with characteristic bluntness, her crimson eyes reflecting satisfaction as she joined our conversation. You think Arthur could have maintained his sanity through that level of power expenditure without your pure light keeping him anchored? The man was channeling forces that should have torn him apart. The tactical support was equally crucial, Serafina added with her typical analytical precision. Individual power means nothing without proper coordination. Arthur's breakthrough was possible because we created the conditions that allowed it to happen. Reka nodded with quiet certainty. Each person contributed exactly what was needed. Perfect synergy achieved. Rose, meanwhile, was already pulling out communication devices with the kind of efficient purpose that made everyone slightly nervous. I should coordinate with the other continents about attendance. If this is going to be a proper celebration of cult defeats, we'll need representation from the northern continent as well. Lucifer and his companions should be recognized for their simultaneous victory. Good thinking, I agreed, then looked back at Rachel with gentle understanding. You can coordinate with your father directly. Make sure the northern continent's achievements get proper recognition alongside ours. The suggestion brightened her expression considerably. Being given a role in organizing the celebration would allow her to reconnect with her homeland's affairs while still maintaining her position here with me. That would be perfect, she said with genuine pleasure. Lucifer will want to bring Dia and Ciola. Jean, who had been observing our conversation with diplomatic attention, stepped forward with the kind of formal precision that marked important announcements. If this celebration is going to have the scope you're discussing, there will be representatives from the eastern and southern continents and the Slatemark Empire as well. A gathering of this significance could serve multiple diplomatic purposes. You're thinking of it as a summit as well as a celebration, Rose observed with approval. Efficient. We could address several ongoing international issues while everyone's gathered in one place. Just as long as nobody tries to turn my achievement celebration into a boring political conference, I said with mock warning. I've earned the right to enjoy this without getting buried in treaty negotiations. Oh, don't worry, Callie said with the kind of savage grin that made everyone slightly nervous. If the politicians get too tedious, we can always demonstrate exactly why continental-level celebrations are necessary. Nothing shuts up boring diplomatic speeches faster than a friendly reminder of what Radiant rank power can accomplish. Please don't threaten the diplomats, Jean said with resigned patience. We've spent years building these relationships. I'm not threatening anyone, Callie replied with mock innocence. I'm just suggesting that actions speak louder than words. Isn't that right, Arthur? Before I could respond to what was clearly a rhetorical question designed to cause trouble, Luna interjected with amused wisdom. Perhaps we should focus on making this a celebration people remember for positive reasons. Agreed, I said firmly, though I couldn't help but smile at the byplay between my friends. This is about recognizing what we've accomplished together, not intimidating anyone. As our group continued discussing the practical implications of what was shaping up to be a massive international gathering, I found myself looking around at the faces of everyone who mattered most to me. Stella bright with enthusiasm about the mathematical challenges involved. My 5 fiancés radiating satisfaction and relief at our shared victories. Jean and Callie showing the kind of relaxed confidence that came from knowing major threats had been permanently eliminated. The ruins of the Savage Communion still smoldered in the distance, but they no longer represented active danger. Just the debris of another problem solved through application of sufficient force and determination. You know, I said thoughtfully, this really is going to be historic. Representatives from every continent, multiple Radiant rank individuals, formal recognition of the cult defeats. The kind of gathering that gets written about in history books. The kind of gathering that shapes the next century of international relations. Rose added with the kind of analytical precision that made her invaluable for strategic planning. The kind of gathering that proves heroes still exist, Rachel said softly, her sapphire eyes reflecting pride that made my chest tighten with emotion. The world was converging in the west for the celebration banquet. Calamity. A title reserved for being powerful enough to endanger an entire continent. A force so overwhelming that their very existence threatened civilization itself. In all of recorded history, only one true calamity had ever descended upon Earth. It happened over 160 years ago. The heavenly demon, a singular existence of destruction, poised to reduce the eastern continent to ruin during its golden age. But before he could complete his devastation, he was stopped by Liam Kagu, the blessed child of the heavens and the first hero, the first human in recorded history to step into high Radiant rank, the realm of demigods. The prophecies spoke of 2 heroes who would rise when the world faced its darkest hours. The first hero had already proven himself against the original calamity. Now, in an age that many believed had moved beyond such legends, a second calamity had emerged. Gideon Ironmaw, the second calamity. He was a monster beyond humanity's normal means to fight. Even Valan Ashbluff and other continental rulers together would have struggled against his overwhelming power. And yet, that calamity was dead. A war that should have ended with the destruction of multiple continents had been stopped. Many had contributed, but one name stood above all others. Arthur Nightingale. At low Radiant rank, Arthur had done the impossible. He had killed a calamity in single combat, claiming the crown of Twilight that marked him as something unprecedented. Not only that, but he had already proven his supremacy by defeating Valan Ashbluff in battle just days before. With this feat, there was no longer any debate. Arthur Nightingale was the second hero of prophecy, the strongest human alive. And now the world was coming for him. From across the continents, the rulers of humanity assembled in the Western continent, each bearing the weight of their respective lands, each coming to witness the rise of a new era. From the north came the Cretans, the greatest spellcasting family in the world. For centuries, their mages had held the northern front, keeping the Umbervale Covenant and the Shadow Seekers at bay. Leading them was Alastair Creighton, the king of the north, one of the 4 archmages of Earth. From the east came the Mount Hua sect. Their princess, Seraphina Zenith, had fought beside Arthur against the second calamity. Their ruler, Mo Zenith, had traveled personally to honor the man who had claimed his daughter's heart. From the south came the Viserions. Marcus Viserion, the Draconic Warden, was the strongest spearman in the world and the king of the south. A warrior feared even among Radiant rankers. From the central continent came Emperor Quinn Slatemark, another of the 4 archmages of Earth, whose daughter Cecilia had also chosen Arthur. And standing among them all was Valan Ashbluff, the necrotic sovereign and king of the West. But there was another presence that commanded equal attention, Lucifer Windward, flanked by his own fiancées. The young man who had simultaneously eliminated the Umbervale Covenant while Arthur faced the calamity. 7 Radiant rankers, the most powerful figures in the world. And all of them had gathered to celebrate the achievements that had reshaped the global balance of power. Marcus Viserion stood beside Alastair Creighton, his crimson hair reflecting the warm glow of the chandelier. "It's been a long time since we gathered like this, hasn't it?" he mused, his voice carrying the casual weight of someone who had witnessed too much history. "Indeed," Alastair replied, his measured smile reflecting satisfaction that went beyond simple pride. "Though I never imagined it would be for this." Marcus exhaled sharply, shaking his head as his gaze found Lucifer across the room. Both of them achieved something truly extraordinary. Arthur killed a calamity, while Lucifer eliminated an entire cult infrastructure in a single day. His eyes darkened slightly with introspection. "They've both surpassed us completely. They are both the same age as my son. Yet they've already claimed heights we never dreamed of reaching." A familiar voice joined their conversation. "Alastair, Marcus, discussing the new generation?" Quinn Slatemark approached with measured steps, his imperial bearing unable to hide the complex emotions surrounding his daughter's choice. The emperor of humanity's greatest empire had come to honor the man who had claimed Cecilia's heart through deed rather than political arrangement. "Even the emperor came personally," Marcus observed with amusement. "Celebrating your future son-in-law's achievements?" Quinn's smile carried depths that spoke to careful political calculation. Arthur Nightingale represents a fundamental shift in how power operates in our world. Individual capability that transcends institutional authority. It would be foolish not to acknowledge such transformation directly. Another figure approached with quiet dignity. "He's reached heights that redefine what we considered possible," Mo Zenith said calmly, his dark robes shifting as he joined their group. "When Gideon bonded with the Infernal Armis, a mythical-grade artifact, he became something beyond normal classification." Silence settled over the gathered rulers as they processed the implications. Mythical-grade artifacts were theoretical constructs, objects of speculation rather than confirmed existence. Now they knew such weapons could bridge nearly 2 full power levels, transforming their wielders into forces of nature. And Arthur had still won. But what truly impressed me, came another voice, was the simultaneous victory in the north. All eyes turned to Lucifer windward as he approached with his fiancées flanking him. Siola Moyong moved with the lethal grace of the Eastern continent's finest martial artists, while Dia Solaran's presence carried the warm authority of the Southern Sea Sun Palace. Lucifer, Alastor acknowledged with genuine respect. Your elimination of the Umbervale Covenant was masterfully executed. To coordinate such a decisive strike while Arthur engaged the calamity. The credit belongs entirely to Arthur, Lucifer interrupted with firm conviction, his dual crowns pulsing gently above his head. My actions were only possible because he drew the primary threat. The second hero faced the greater challenge and achieved the more significant victory. The modesty was genuine, but it only served to highlight the unprecedented nature of what had occurred. Two individuals acting in coordination had eliminated multiple continental-level threats simultaneously. The conversations gradually faded as an unmistakable presence began to manifest at the hall's entrance. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation as every enhanced sense in the room detected what was approaching. Then the great doors opened. Arthur Nightingale entered with the kind of presence that redefined what power meant to those who witnessed it. But he was not alone. Rachel Creighton walked beside him, her golden hair elegantly styled and adorned with a delicate silver circlet that caught the light. Cecilia Slatemark moved with the refined grace of imperial upbringing, her crimson gown flowing like liquid fire, complemented by the ruby pendant that marked her as heir to the Slatemark throne. Rose Springshaper carried herself with businesslike precision that couldn't hide deep affection, her elegant navy dress perfectly tailored, with sapphire earrings that matched the cool professionalism of her demeanor. Serafina Zenith flowed like liquid grace in a gown of pale blue silk that seemed to shimmer with each step, her platinum jewelry catching the light in patterns as beautiful as frost on winter mornings. Reika Solien walked with quiet confidence, her black dress simple yet striking, with silver accessories that complemented the intricate patterns visible along her arms. And skipping alongside them with barely contained excitement was Stella, Arthur's adopted daughter, her dark eyes bright with mathematical fascination as she catalogued the unprecedented gathering of power around her. The effect on the assembled rulers was immediate and profound. Every radiant ranker in the room felt their own capabilities measured against Arthur's presence and found them wanting. This wasn't just increased strength, it was fundamental transcendence that operated on principles they couldn't fully comprehend. Marcus Viserion rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his red eyes reflecting something between admiration and disbelief. I had heard Arthur achieved something extraordinary during the battle, he muttered. But this power transcends normal classification entirely. The second hero, Alastor said simply, and the title carried weight that made everyone present understand they were witnessing history. Arthur moved through the hall with purposeful strides, his family following information that spoke to shared trials and mutual trust. Every eye tracked their progress. Every enhanced sense catalogued the unprecedented nature of their collective presence. The most powerful rulers in the world watched, waiting to see who Arthur would approach first. Would he acknowledge Alastor Creighton, his mentor and future father-in-law? Perhaps Quinn Slatemark, the emperor and another one of his father-in-laws? Maybe Mo Zenith, yet another one of his father-in-laws and the king of the sect which he honed his swordsmanship in? The answer was none of them. Arthur walked past the assembled rulers with polite nods of acknowledgement, leading his family toward three who had been waiting at the gathering's edge with expressions that transcended political calculation. Alice Nightingale, Douglas Nightingale, and Arya Nightingale. His family. Alice's dark hair shone under the grand chandeliers, her sapphire eyes tracking her son's approach with the kind of maternal assessment that saw past power to the person beneath. Beside her, Douglas stood with quiet pride, his black hair touched with silver, his expression carefully controlled. Arthur came to a halt before them, and for a moment the second hero, the man who had killed a calamity and reshaped continental politics, was simply a son coming home. Arya crossed her arms. You outdid yourself even more this time. I did. Hope I didn't worry you too much, Arthur replied with a smile of his own. Douglas stepped forward first, pulling Arthur into an embrace that carried years of worry and pride. You did well, son. Better than well. Alice didn't wait for ceremony. The moment Douglas released him, she wrapped her arms around Arthur with fierce intensity. "I don't forgive you for making me worry," she whispered against his shoulder, though her voice carried more relief than accusation. Arthur smiled, holding his mother close while Stella bounced impatiently beside them, and his fiancés watched with expressions of fond understanding. "We'll talk after the celebration," he promised. "We will," Alice confirmed, stepping back to study his face with maternal thoroughness. "But for now, let the world celebrate its second hero properly." After the emotional reunion with my family, I felt the familiar weight of social obligation settling around me like a familiar cloak. The gathered rulers of the world had come here specifically to acknowledge what I'd accomplished, and it would be both rude and politically unwise to ignore them completely. "I should make the rounds," I said quietly to my family, noting how Stella was practically vibrating with excitement at being surrounded by so much concentrated power. "The continental leaders traveled a long way to be here. Go handle your diplomatic duties," Alice said with maternal understanding, though her grip on my arm lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "We'll be here when you're done with all the formalities." I approached the cluster of rulers with measured steps, feeling their enhanced senses tracking my every movement. Even without the crown of twilight manifesting, my transformed presence was unmistakable to anyone with sufficient perception. "Alastair," I said warmly as I reached my mentor and future father-in-law. The king of the North's sapphire eyes reflected pride that went far beyond political calculation. "Arthur," he replied, pulling me into an embrace that spoke to years of shared training and mutual respect. "When I first took you on as a student, I knew you had exceptional potential. But this transformation—" He paused, studying my face with the kind of analytical attention that came from years of assessing magical development. "This transcends every expectation I might have harbored. You taught me the fundamentals that made everything else possible," I replied with genuine gratitude. "Without your guidance, I never would have developed the foundation necessary for this level of growth." "The student has surpassed the master," Alastair said with satisfaction that couldn't hide slight melancholy. "As it should be, as it must be, if the world is to continue moving forward." I turned to Marcus Viserion next, the draconic warden's crimson hair catching the light as he studied me with analytical precision. "Marcus," I acknowledged with respectful nod. "Arthur Nightingale," he replied, his voice carrying the kind of professional assessment that came from someone who had spent decades evaluating combat potential. "I remember when you were just another promising young warrior. Now," he shook his head with something that might have been amazement, "now you've redefined what individual power can accomplish." "The threats required adaptation," I said simply. "Gideon forced me to transcend limitations I didn't even know I possessed. And in doing so, you've raised the bar for everyone else," Marcus observed with wry amusement. "Do you have any idea how many continental-level combatants are going to be pushing themselves to new heights because of what you've demonstrated?" Before I could respond, Quinn Slatemark approached with the measured steps of someone accustomed to commanding empires. "Arthur," the Emperor said with diplomatic precision that couldn't quite hide paternal complexity, "my daughter has chosen well." "Your Majesty," I replied formally, then allowed warmth to enter my voice. "Cecilia has been invaluable. Her chaos magic and tactical brilliance were crucial to our success against Gideon. She always did prefer action to politics," Quinn said with paternal affection that transcended imperial dignity. "I'm pleased to see her talents being put to such worthy use." Mo Zenith joined our conversation with quiet dignity, his dark eyes reflecting the kind of deep satisfaction that came from seeing long-term investments pay off. "Arthur," he said simply, "you have proven worthy of my daughter's devotion." "Serafina fought beside me against impossible odds," I replied with genuine respect. "Her ice magic and sword work were instrumental in creating the openings I needed to achieve breakthrough. The Mount Hua sect is honored by the Alliance," Mo confirmed with formal precision that couldn't hide personal approval. As I finished the formal greetings with the continental rulers, I noticed two other familiar figures approaching. people whose presence here spoke to relationships that transcended simple political necessity. Grand Marshal, I said with genuine warmth as Malin Potton reached me. Her navy blue hair elegantly styled and her golden eyes reflecting satisfaction that went beyond professional courtesy. Arthur, she replied with the kind of measured respect that came from someone who had witnessed my capabilities firsthand. When I heard you defeated a calamity, I knew I had to see for myself what you'd become. Still the same person you helped guide through military protocol, I said with amusement, remembering our earlier interactions. Just with significantly more destructive potential. The same core principles, she agreed with approval, but applied on a scale that reshapes continental politics. The military implications alone. She paused, shaking her head with something approaching awe. Individual power that can end wars in hours rather than years. Arthur Nightingale. The booming voice drew my attention to Paul Locrian as the master of the Ebony Tower approached with characteristic enthusiasm. His presence here was particularly meaningful. Paul had been instrumental in helping me develop Valeria, my bone symbiote. Paul, I said with genuine affection, accepting the bone-crushing embrace he offered. I didn't expect to see you here. Miss the celebration of my most promising student's ascension to legendary status? Paul replied with mock offense. I wouldn't have missed this for all the knowledge in the world. Besides, his expression grew more serious. I needed to see what you'd accomplished with the theoretical frameworks we discussed. Your help in creating Valeria was truly invaluable, I admitted with gratitude. As I worked through these meaningful reconnections, I became aware of a familiar presence approaching from across the hall. When I turned, I saw Lucifer Windward making his way toward our group with his characteristic confident stride. Arthur, he said with genuine warmth as he reached us, his verdant eyes reflecting satisfaction that transcended mere political courtesy. Lucifer, I replied, feeling a smile spread across my face as I clasped his offered hand. Congratulations on eliminating the Umbervale Covenant. Perfect timing as always. Says the man who killed a calamity in single combat, Lucifer replied with amusement. Though I have to admit, your breakthrough provided excellent cover for my own operations. Hard to notice one continental threat being eliminated when everyone's focused on a calamity fight. We stepped slightly apart from the gathered dignitaries, creating space for a conversation between equals rather than diplomatic formalities. You've grown stronger, I observed, noting the way power flowed through him with unprecedented control. So have you, he replied with genuine appreciation. When I felt the resonance of your transformation, I knew the world had fundamentally changed. The future is going to be interesting, I said thoughtfully. Terrifying for some people, Lucifer agreed with a grin that held notes of anticipation. But interesting for us. As the evening progressed and the formal acknowledgments gave way to actual celebration, I found myself being pulled toward the dance floor by increasingly insistent feminine hands. You can't spend the entire evening talking politics, Rachel said with the kind of maternal authority that brooked no argument. This is supposed to be a celebration. She's right, Cecilia added with characteristic directness. Besides, everyone wants to see the second hero actually enjoying himself instead of looking like he's calculating continental defense strategies. The music was elegant and formal, the kind of classical pieces that complemented grand ballrooms and important social occasions. As I led Rachel through the opening dance, I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying since the Gideon fight finally begin to ease. Thank you, I said quietly as we moved through practice steps. For everything. For believing in me when the odds were impossible. Always, she replied with simple certainty that made my chest tighten with emotion. The dance with Cecilia was more energetic, her natural chaos creating subtle variations in the traditional patterns that kept me on my toes. You know, she said with amusement, killing calamities is impressive, but your dancing has definitely improved since we first met. I've had excellent teachers, I replied, spinning her through a complex sequence that drew approving murmurs from the watching crowd. Rose's approach to dancing was characteristically precise, every movement calculated for maximum elegance while maintaining perfect efficiency. The political implications of tonight are staggering, she said with the kind of analytical precision that somehow made business discussion romantic. But I suppose that's tomorrow's concern. Tonight, we celebrate. I agreed, dipping her low enough to make her laugh with genuine delight. Serafina moved like flowing water, her natural grace turning the dance into something approaching art. You seem different, she observed with her typical analytical perception. More settled, more certain of your place in the world. Hard to feel uncertain when surrounded by people who matter this much to me, I replied, noting how the frost patterns that sometimes appeared around her when she was emotional were forming delicate spirals across the dance floor. My final dance was with Reika, whose quiet confidence complemented my own movements perfectly. This is what we fought for, she said softly as we moved through the concluding steps. Moments like this, peace, joy, the future, worth every sacrifice, I confirmed, feeling the truth of those words settle into my bones. As the music concluded and applause filled the grand ballroom, I found myself surrounded by my family, biological and chosen, in a moment that crystallized everything I'd been fighting to protect. Stella was practically glowing with excitement. My parents watched with expressions of profound satisfaction, and my 5 fiancés radiated the kind of contentment that came from battles won and futures secured. The celebration continued around us. Rulers and nobles and magical practitioners from across the world gathered to acknowledge that the age of calamities was ending, that heroes still existed, that hope remained stronger than despair. It was, I reflected, exactly the kind of moment that made all the impossible battles worthwhile. But just as I was settling into the comfortable rhythm of victory celebration, the grand ballroom's atmosphere shifted. Conversations faltered as every enhanced sense in the room detected something approaching, power signatures that carried familiar resonance but shouldn't have been able to penetrate the palace's extensive security. The great doors burst open with dramatic flair, revealing a flash of pink and crimson that made my blood run cold with recognition and growing alarm. Surprise! The playful voice that rang out across the grand ballroom carried with it a chill that seemed to freeze every conversation, every breath, every heartbeat in the massive space. The great doors had opened without ceremony, without announcement, and from them descended a figure that made every enhanced sense in the room scream warnings about power that transcended normal classification. She wasn't just any ordinary threat. This was one of the 3 living popes in the world, an enemy of all humanity whose very existence represented a fundamental challenge to the order we'd been fighting to preserve. Alisara Velcroix, the Crimson Dancer. And she had chosen to appear here, in the heart of the Western continent's power, surrounded by the strongest individuals our world could muster. To most observers, such an action would seem like suicide. Walking into a gathering that included 7 Radiant rankers, myself fresh from killing a calamity, dozens of powerful immortal rank combatants, and Lucifer whose own transcendent abilities marked him as beyond normal classification. But as I watched her descend the grand staircase with unhurried grace, I understood with crystalline clarity that her confidence wasn't misplaced arrogance. It was simple fact, because she was Alisara Velcroix, and she alone possessed the right to walk into this gathering like she owned it. I felt the mana signatures of everyone around me beginning to flare as combat instincts kicked in, the assembled rulers and warriors preparing for a battle that would likely level the entire palace. My hand shot up immediately, the gesture carrying enough authority to make even the continental leaders pause. "Stop," I said quietly, but my voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom with perfect clarity. "This isn't a fight we can afford." Her power? Luna's voice trembled through our mental bond, carrying notes of genuine fear that I'd never heard from my ancient companion. "Arthur, I can't even believe this level of existence is possible." I had to agree with her assessment. Even without engaging my enhanced senses fully, Alisara's presence was overwhelming in ways that defied easy description. Currently, I was strong enough to defeat any calamity that might emerge, confident enough in my abilities to face even the legendary heavenly demon of the past. But looking at Alisara now, I could feel that she had transcended even those bounds completely. "Master," Erebus whispered through our connection, his ancient consciousness carrying uncertainty that chilled me to the bone. Her power signature, it operates on principles that exist beyond my understanding. Even Valeria, whose bone symbiote nature usually provided confident analysis of any threat, seemed to shrink within my shadow as she processed what we were facing. Alisara wore a crimson dress that complemented her jade-green eyes and pink hair perfectly, her physical beauty undeniable even in this moment of extreme tension. But I wasn't focused on her appearance. I was analyzing her essence, that overwhelming sense of being that radiated from her like heat from a star. "Come on. I missed you, Arthur," she said with cheerful casualness that made the temperature in the room seem to drop by several degrees. Her arms folded behind her back as she approached, the gesture pushing her chest forward in a way that might have been unconsciously provocative if everything about Alisara wasn't calculated for maximum effect. "It's been a long time since we saw each other, right?" "So what?" I responded with as much neutrality as I could manage, acutely aware that every person in the ballroom was watching this exchange with the kind of intensity that came from witnessing something that would reshape their understanding of global power dynamics. "How cold," she replied, her expression shifting through what looked like genuine hurt before settling back into amused satisfaction. "I even helped you against Gideon, didn't I? That crimson thread that saved your life when you were about to fall. You also held back Valen," I reminded her, noting how several of the assembled rulers tensed at this revelation. The idea that she had been manipulating the Calamity battle from behind the scenes was clearly news to most of them. She shrugged with elegant dismissal, as if preventing one of the world's strongest fighters from intervening in a continental-level battle was merely a casual favor between friends. "Details. The important thing is that you succeeded, and now look how strong you've become. Anyway," she continued with the kind of bright enthusiasm that made her seem like an excited young woman rather than one of humanity's greatest threats, "I actually came here for another reason, not just because I missed you." With a flourish that bordered on theatrical, she produced an elaborately decorated cake from what must have been spatial storage. The confection was a masterwork of culinary art, decorated with imagery that celebrated my recent achievements in ways that were both beautiful and deeply unsettling coming from her. "Congratulations, Arthur," she announced with genuine joy that made my skin crawl. "Congrats on becoming rank 1. Congrats on killing a calamity. Congrats on reaching Radiant rank." The casual way she cataloged my accomplishments, as if she had been following my progress with the devoted attention of a proud parent, triggered every combat instinct I possessed. My fist shot forward, compressed astral energy flowing through the strike with enough force to shatter stone. The cake vanished into her spatial storage before my attack could connect, and her delicate hand caught my fist with casual ease that completely negated the tremendous force behind the blow. Before I could react, she pulled me closer with strength that made my enhanced physique feel like that of an ordinary human. "Ah, do you want your present?" she asked with playful mockery, her jade eyes sparkling with amusement. "How did you guess that it was me?" My response was to drive my knee upward toward her midsection, channeling gray energy through the strike in patterns that should have been impossible to block. But she intercepted the attack effortlessly, her free hand catching my leg while her grip on my fist never wavered. "Come on," she whispered, leaning close enough that I could feel her breath against my ear. "You know you can't touch me at your current level. Even if you manifest that beautiful crown of yours, there's simply too much difference between us." The casual certainty in her voice was more terrifying than any threat could have been. She wasn't boasting or trying to intimidate. She was simply stating an observable fact about the relative scales of our power. And she was right. Gray wasn't invincible, despite its incredible properties. The fundamental limitation wasn't in the energy itself, but in how much I could produce and maintain. Converting pure light and deep dark into gray was incredibly inefficient, requiring massive amounts of both base energies to create relatively small quantities of the transcendent force. Beyond that, my application of gray to combat techniques was still rough, limited by my current mana rank and the fact that I was still learning to properly utilize such unprecedented power. "Come with me," she whispered with intimate intensity that made my blood run cold. Just like the good old days we had when I was Emma. The mention of Emma's name triggered something primal in my consciousness. My mana began to flare involuntarily, the crown of twilight beginning to manifest above my head as gray energy prepared to cascade through my system regardless of the tactical futility. But before the transformation could complete, reality twisted around us. Space folded according to principles that my enhanced perception could barely track as Alisara's teleportation magic activated with effortless precision. The grand ballroom vanished, replaced by what looked like a moonlit garden that existed in some pocket dimension removed from normal geography. Ancient trees surrounded us, their branches heavy with blossoms that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Hands off!" I shouted, allowing gray to flow through me as the crown of twilight blazed to life above my head. The transcendent energy cascaded around my form in patterns that had been sufficient to kill a calamity, reality itself bending to accommodate forces that operated beyond normal limitation. "Cute," Alisara said with genuine fondness, though her jade eyes sharpened with something that might have been professional interest. Crimson threads materialized from the air around her like living things, each one pulsing with power that made my enhanced senses recoil in recognition of something fundamentally superior. The threads pressed against my gray energy with casual force, and I watched in growing horror as my transcendent power, the same force that had carved through a calamity's defenses, simply shattered like glass. The crown of twilight flickered and died as the gray energy supporting it was overwhelmed completely. My enhanced physical capabilities, my connection to Luna, even my basic mana manipulation, everything that defined my current level of power was suppressed as effortlessly as an adult might restrain a struggling child. "But not enough," Alisara said with gentle finality as her fingers pressed against my chest. The impact drove me backward with force that compressed my enhanced physique against the garden's soft earth. Before I could attempt to recover, she straddled me with fluid grace that spoke to absolute confidence in her dominance of the situation. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, though my position made the question somewhat rhetorical. "Stop using gray, Arthur," she said, her voice taking on a warning tone that made the air around us seem to thicken with potential violence. More crimson threads appeared, hovering in the space around us like suspended lightning waiting for permission to strike. "I'd rather not hurt you, but I will if you keep pushing against power you can't hope to match." I considered my options with the cold calculation that had carried me through countless impossible battles. Fighting her here would be not just futile but potentially suicidal. The gap between our capabilities was so vast that continued resistance would likely result in injury or worse, with no meaningful chance of success. Reluctantly, I exhaled and allowed the gray energy to dissipate completely. The transcendent power that had redefined my existence retreated back into whatever space it occupied when not actively channeled, leaving me feeling suddenly ordinary in ways I hadn't experienced since achieving my breakthrough. "Good boy," Alisara said with approval that carried notes of affection mixed with something far more complex. Her jade eyes studied my face with the kind of intensity that suggested she was memorizing every detail, cataloging micro-expressions for some private purpose I couldn't begin to guess. The moonlit garden around us was beautiful in ways that spoke to powers that could reshape reality according to aesthetic whim. The glowing blossoms cast everything in soft light that made even this tense confrontation seem somehow romantic, as if she had chosen this setting specifically to create atmosphere for whatever came next. "You've grown so much stronger," she continued with genuine wonder, her fingers tracing patterns across my chest that made me acutely aware of our current position. The Arthur who fought Gideon was magnificent, transcendent, everything I hoped you could become. "Then why are you doing this?" I asked, genuine confusion mixing with frustration at my helplessness. Her expression shifted, jade eyes reflecting depths that carried emotions too complex for easy interpretation. For a moment, the playful confidence that defined her public persona cracked, revealing something underneath that might have been genuine vulnerability. "Because," she said quietly, her voice carrying weight that made the garden around us seem to hold its breath in anticipation, "I truly love you. Emma was my everything in my past life." The thought came unbidden as I stared up at Alisara's jade eyes, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Emma had been the one who brought color into a life that had been nothing but shades of gray. She taught me how to live, not merely exist, showed me that there could be joy and warmth and connection in a world that had seemed cold and mechanical. That was why she had been irreplaceable, unique, sacred. When I first suspected that Emma had come to this world in the form of Alisara, it had caused immense internal panic. Not hope, not joy, but terror. Because this twisted creature straddling me now was everything Emma had never been. Where Emma's love had been gentle and nurturing, Alisara's was possessive and consuming. Where Emma had encouraged my growth and independence, Alisara sought to cage me for her own satisfaction. Alisara manifested her love through her desire to own me completely. She wanted me in a cage, all to herself and herself alone, with my every whim subordinated to hers and all my desires and thoughts focused solely on her. She didn't want to share me with anybody. Not my family, not my friends, not even my adopted daughter. She wanted to break me utterly and call it love. That was the twisted emotion Alisara spoke of when she claimed to love me. "I don't love you anymore," I said simply, meeting her jade gaze with steady resolve. Her face paled as if I'd struck her physically, her grip on my chest loosening for the first time since this confrontation began. For a moment, I saw something crack in her perfect composure. A flash of genuine hurt that might have belonged to the girl I'd once known. "I have 5 wonderful fiancés, 2 loving parents, my sister and my adopted daughter and all my friends now, Emma," I said firmly, letting the name carry weight that made her flinch. "I don't need you in my life. You don't color my life anymore." Because it was true. My life wasn't gray like it had been in my past existence. I didn't need a single point of color to make existence bearable. I had a whole spectrum of relationships and connections that filled every day with meaning and purpose. And I certainly didn't need her like this, in this obsessed form that was a perversion of everything Emma had represented. "Good," Alisara said after a long moment, though her voice carried undertones that made my blood run cold. "Your love for me was wrong anyway." "What?" Alarm bells began ringing in my head as her expression shifted from hurt to something far more dangerous. "You loved Emma," she continued with clinical precision that made each word feel like a blade. "The weak little Emma who gave up her mission for teenage emotions she felt for her target, you. The same weak Emma who couldn't even protect you or do anything of value to help you when it mattered." Her jade eyes blazed brighter as she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "I am not Emma. No, I am far beyond her. In the past 4 years, after leaving Earth, the only thing I focused on was getting stronger. Strong enough that even when you reach your absolute peak, you won't be able to kill me." The casual certainty in her voice was more terrifying than any threat could have been. She wasn't boasting or trying to intimidate. She was stating her life's mission with the kind of absolute conviction that had apparently driven her to transcend every known limitation. "Are you that confident?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Alisara was certainly much stronger than me right now, operating on levels that made my recent breakthrough seem like a child's first steps. But I could catch up eventually. I had to catch up, for the sake of everyone I cared about. "That is my very goal," she said, placing a hand over her heart. "Just like you have to get strong enough to kill me, I have to get strong enough to break you at your peak. I will make you beg for my obsession, Arthur Nightingale." The way she spoke made it clear this wasn't just about power or control. It was about proving something fundamental about the nature of love and strength and dominance. She had turned our relationship into a philosophical battleground where only total victory would be acceptable. "That will never happen, Alisara Velcroix," I said with as much conviction as I could muster while pinned beneath someone who could casually suppress my most transcendent abilities. She chuckled at my defiance, the sound carrying notes of genuine amusement mixed with anticipation. "I do admit you're stronger than I expected. That gray energy is very impressive indeed. The way you killed Gideon was beautiful." Her hands moved to my shirt, beginning to unbutton it with casual intimacy that made my skin crawl. "What are you doing?" I asked, unable to keep the tension from my voice. "This is your weak point, isn't it?" she asked with clinical interest, her palm pressing against the lower part of my stomach. "Stop, Alisara," I said, trying to shift my weight and finding that her position made meaningful resistance impossible. "I'm just getting a bit excited, is all," she replied with the kind of breathless enthusiasm that made her seem almost human for a moment. "You must have plenty of experience in this world already, right?"
5 fiancés.
I imagine they've all been very educational. The implications in her voice made my jaw clench with anger. I tried to channel astral energy through my sword heart, hoping to access enough power to at least attempt escape. Alisara's fingers pressed into my chest with surgical precision, and I felt my sword heart simply stop beating. "What?" I whispered in shock, the absence of my sword heart's rhythm leaving me feeling hollow and disconnected from every source of power I possessed. "Control," she whispered, her jade eyes reflecting satisfaction that bordered on ecstasy. "With you so close to me and so weak, I can manipulate every part of your body exactly as I wish. Stopping your sword heart is child's play for someone of my level." The casual demonstration of dominance was more effective than any torture could have been. She could kill me right now, or worse. She could keep me alive and helpless indefinitely, a trophy in whatever twisted collection she was building. Alisara leaned closer, her pink hair falling around us like a curtain that blocked out the rest of the moonlit garden. I could feel her breath against my lips, could see my own reflection in her jade eyes as she prepared to claim whatever symbolic victory this kiss would represent. Just before our lips touched, she froze. Her head whipped around with predatory alertness, jade eyes scanning the garden's perimeter with the kind of focus that spoke to genuine threat detection. For the first time since this confrontation began, I saw something like wariness in her perfect composure. "How annoying," she said, though her voice carried undertones that suggested whatever was approaching was more than merely irritating. I was just getting to the fun part. The air around us began to shift, reality warping in patterns that spoke to power operating on scales similar to Alisara's own capabilities. Someone or something was coming, and they possessed enough strength to make even the Crimson Dancer consider retreat. "Fine, I'll withdraw for now," she said with obvious reluctance, rising from her position with fluid grace while my sword heart suddenly resumed its normal rhythm. "But this isn't over, my Arthur. Next time, there won't be any interruptions." She leaned down to whisper directly into my ear, her voice carrying promises that made my blood freeze. "I'll be watching, always watching, and when you're ready, when you've reached the peak of what this world considers possible, I'll be there to show you that even gods can be broken." Then she was gone, vanishing into whatever dimensional space she used for travel, leaving me alone in the moonlit garden with only the scent of her perfume and the memory of absolute helplessness. But I wasn't truly alone. As I struggled to sit up, still shaken by the demonstration of how completely outclassed I currently was, a familiar presence manifested at the garden's edge. A woman stepped from the shadows between the glowing trees, her form radiating power that had challenged even Alisara's overwhelming capabilities. Dark hair caught the moonlight as she approached with measured steps, her expression carrying maternal concern mixed with the kind of protective fury that had apparently been sufficient to make the Crimson Dancer reconsider her plans. "Thank you, Mother," I said quietly, understanding finally arriving like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. It had started as nothing more than a curious question that had been nagging at me for years. Why was Arthur Nightingale, supposedly the son of an ordinary knight captain and guild master in the Slatemark Empire, so unnaturally gifted? So impossibly talented that he had been born with a gift as fundamentally broken as Mythweaver, an ability that defied every known classification system and operated on principles that even the greatest magical theorists couldn't fully comprehend? The power wasn't inherited from my father. Douglas Nightingale, for all his skill as a warrior and his integrity as a man, hadn't possessed anything even remotely approaching the kind of transcendent capabilities that defined my existence. His abilities were respectable for someone of his station, but thoroughly conventional in every measurable way. So how had such overwhelming potential come to manifest in me? For the longest time, I had been approaching the question from entirely the wrong angle. I had assumed that my father was the source of whatever legacy had shaped my existence. I had built my understanding of my own identity around the belief that my strength, my strange circumstances, had been influenced by his lineage and his choices. But I had been completely, fundamentally blind to the truth. The Nightingale family was indeed special, more special than I had ever imagined. But my father was not from the true Nightingale bloodline. He had married into it. The source of my power, the origin of everything that made me what I was, had come from my mother. Not Douglas, with his straightforward military background and uncomplicated worldview, but Alice, the woman whose depths I was only now beginning to fathom. All along it had been her. I stared at her now in the moonlit garden where Alisara had teleported us, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. The warm, maternal figure I had grown up with seemed to shimmer like a mirage, revealing something far more complex and dangerous beneath. "Does father know?" I asked carefully, my voice barely above a whisper as I processed the implications of what I was seeing. "Douglas is a good, down-to-earth man," she replied without hesitation, as if she had thought through this conversation countless times over the years. "He is not aware of anything, Arthur. His love for both of us is genuine, uncomplicated, and based on the simple truth of the family we've built together." The way she spoke about him carried genuine affection, but also a protective distance that suggested she had been carefully managing what he could and couldn't know for decades. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of revelation settling around me like a suffocating blanket. "Then, do you know?" I gestured to myself, the question carrying implications that I couldn't quite bring myself to voice directly. She nodded with the kind of calm certainty that made my blood run cold. "I do." Then, with a slight tilt of her head that somehow made her seem both more human and more alien, she added the words that would reshape everything I thought I understood about my existence. "I orchestrated this, after all." The casual way she said it sent ice through my veins. Not regret, not guilt, not even satisfaction. Just simple acknowledgement of a complex plan that had apparently been years in the making. "How do you think a soul from another world ended up in this specific body?" she asked with the kind of gentle curiosity that a teacher might use when guiding a student toward an obvious conclusion. I stiffened. Every instinct I possessed screaming warnings about truths I wasn't prepared to hear. "How?" Her smile was small and almost gentle, but the words that followed were anything but. "I simply had to kill my son when he was born," she said, her voice carrying the casual tone someone might use to discuss minor household arrangements. "That way, I could remove the original soul from the body." The world seemed to stop around me. Every sound in the garden, the whisper of wind through the glowing trees, the distant rustle of leaves, even my own breathing, faded into absolute silence as I processed what she had just told me. She continued as if explaining a mathematical equation rather than describing infanticide. "Then, I placed an autonomous soul, a carefully constructed placeholder, that would function normally until the time came for the integration process much later in life. It was a perfect solution, really. Arthur would grow up strong, independent, and talented enough for the world to take notice of his potential." Her blue eyes, now revealed to be something far more complex than simple maternal warmth, began to gleam with something that might have been pride in her own ingenuity. "And when he entered Mythos Academy, at exactly the right moment in his development." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air between us. "I simply placed your soul into his prepared body." The silence that followed felt like it might crush me entirely. The words echoed in my mind, too vast and too horrifying to process all at once. Each syllable carried implications that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my identity, my family, my very existence. She had said it so easily, so matter-of-factly. But the process itself, the incredible complexity involved, the precise timing required, the level of power necessary to manipulate souls across dimensional boundaries, was beyond anything I had thought possible. This wasn't simple magic. This wasn't even something a Radiant ranker should have been capable of achieving. This was something that operated on principles I couldn't even begin to comprehend. "How is this even possible?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding hollow and distant even to my own ears. She gave me a look that carried just a hint of disappointment. as if my question were both understandable and somewhat unnecessary given what I should have been able to deduce from the available evidence. "You know how it is," she said with gentle chiding that somehow made the revelation even more unsettling. "Myth weaver." Then, with a smile that seemed to contain depths I couldn't fathom, she added, "I am simply operating at a higher level than you currently understand." The truth hit me like a physical blow as the pieces finally clicked into place. My mother had released just the barest hint of her true presence. Not even a direct manifestation of power, not even a fraction of her actual capabilities, and it had been sufficient to make Alisara Velcroix retreat immediately. More than that, Alisara hadn't even sensed her approach until the very last moment. The Crimson Dancer, whose power transcended every classification I understood, had been caught completely off guard by someone who had been hiding in plain sight for my entire life. My breath came slow and measured as I tried to process the scale of what this implied. "Divine rank?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer would be more complex than a simple confirmation. She shook her head with something that might have been regret. I wasn't worthy of that particular classification. The way she said it, calm and without apparent disappointment, merely stating an observable fact about her own limitations, somehow made it even more terrifying. She spoke of failing to achieve divine rank the way someone might mention not quite reaching the top shelf at a grocery store. Then she looked directly at me, her blue eyes carrying depths that seemed to pierce straight through every defense I possessed, and I felt my stomach twist with apprehension. "You've done something foolish, son." The simple sentence carried the weight of absolute judgment. Not anger, not disappointment, just the clear assessment of someone who saw all the angles I had missed. "You've made a very dangerous woman obsessed with you." I swallowed hard, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones like poison. "Alisara Velcroix," my mother continued with clinical precision, "is someone even I cannot touch recklessly. Her power operates on scales that make direct confrontation inadvisable." I had suspected as much from our recent encounter, but hearing it confirmed by someone whose capabilities apparently dwarfed everything I had previously imagined possible made the situation feel infinitely more dire. Because if my mother, who could casually manipulate souls across dimensional boundaries and had been powerful enough to orchestrate my entire existence, considered Alisara too dangerous to challenge directly, then what hope did the rest of us have? "Do you hate me now?" she asked with the kind of emotional detachment someone might use when asking about tomorrow's weather forecast. Hate? The concept seemed almost meaningless in the face of revelations that had completely redefined everything I thought I understood about reality. Did I hate her? I honestly didn't know what I felt. Confusion, certainly. A sense of betrayal that went deeper than simple deception. But also a strange kind of relief that some of the mysteries surrounding my existence finally had answers, even if those answers raised far more questions than they resolved. "What exactly are we?" I asked instead, focusing on the broader implications rather than trying to process the emotional complexity of learning that my entire life had been orchestrated by someone whose power and agenda I couldn't begin to fathom. For the first time since this conversation began, I saw something flicker in her expression. Not quite emotion, but something closer to genuine engagement with a question that actually mattered. "What are the nightingales, Mother?" I pressed, feeling that I was finally approaching the heart of whatever truth she had been protecting. "Please, tell me. I'm strong enough now to understand." She studied me for a long moment, her gaze seeming to catalog every aspect of my current capabilities and psychological readiness. Finally, she gave a single nod of apparent approval. "I suppose you are." She turned away from contemplation of the impossible blossoms surrounding us, her gaze fixing on me with the kind of intensity that made me acutely aware of how much I still didn't understand. "Humanity is pathetic," she said with clinical detachment that somehow made the words more cutting than any anger could have been. "Weak, fragile, short-lived, foolish, prone to making the same mistakes across generations while convincing themselves they're making progress." Her words carried no hatred, no particular emotion at all, just the kind of objective assessment that someone might make about any observable phenomenon. "But," she continued, her voice taking on notes of something that might have been respect, There was one being who understood this truth better than anyone else. My chest tightened with anticipation as she prepared to reveal the final piece of whatever cosmic puzzle had shaped my existence. Tiamat, she said, and I felt the name settle into my bones like a fundamental truth I had always known but never acknowledged. The Radiant Dragon, the Dragon Empress whose world was destroyed by forces beyond her ability to prevent. The one who fled to Earth carrying the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization's failure. Her fingers traced patterns against the tree's luminous bark as she continued. She knew that humanity could not stand alone against the kinds of threats that destroy worlds. She had seen what happened when a species relied solely on their own strength, their own wisdom, their own heroes. The weight of cosmic history seemed to press down on the garden around us, making even the moonlight feel heavy with implication. That's why, she whispered with something approaching reverence, she created us, the nightingales. Over 1,000 years ago, I didn't stay in the moonlit garden for long after my conversation with my mother. The revelations about the nightingales, about Tiamat's ancient plan, about the true nature of my existence. All of it was staggering in scope and implication. But regardless of cosmic conspiracies and thousand-year-old dragon schemes, I had immediate responsibilities to attend to. Getting kidnapped by one of the world's 3 popes while holding the title of Rank 1 was certainly far from ideal, politically speaking. The assembled rulers and dignitaries would be wondering where I'd disappeared to, and my prolonged absence would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer publicly. As I approached the banquet hall, my enhanced senses detected the familiar energy signatures of the assembled guests, but also something new. Another presence that hadn't been there when Alisara had so dramatically interrupted the evening's festivities. Looks like another guest has arrived, I murmured, noting the additional Radiant rank signature among the gathered powers. This is all so complicated. Luna's voice carried through our mental bond, tinged with emotional complexity that went beyond simple confusion. To think that Tiamat orchestrated all of this, that you were created rather than simply chosen. It's like we're both. She trailed off, but I understood what she couldn't quite say aloud. Luna and I shared more than just the bond between a human and his companion. We were both artificial beings, created rather than naturally born. She was the only Qilin in existence, crafted by forces and for purposes that even she didn't fully understand. Learning about my own manufactured origins had clearly struck closer to home than I'd initially realized. She didn't do anything wrong, I said gently, trying to provide some comfort for whatever internal struggle she was experiencing. Tiamat was trying to protect Earth and humanity in her own way. The fact that her methods were unconventional doesn't make the intention malicious. I know that intellectually. Luna protested through our bond, her mental voice carrying the kind of frustrated sadness that came from having emotions that didn't align with logical understanding. But it still feels wrong somehow, like everything we've shared has been predetermined. I stopped walking, suddenly understanding the root of her distress. Luna's connection to me wasn't just companionship. It was the bond between 2 beings who had been created for purposes beyond their own choosing, finding genuine meaning in a relationship that transcended whatever artificial origins had shaped them. Come out, I said firmly, encouraging her to manifest physically rather than remaining as a voice in my head. Luna appeared beside me in her adult form, the seal that had once limited her to childlike appearance now completely broken. She stood with the kind of ethereal grace that marked her as something beyond human classification, her amethyst hair catching the light from the palace windows, while her golden eyes reflected depths of ancient wisdom mixed with very current emotional turmoil. "What is it?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected what I was going to say. "I think your mood would improve if you actually got to enjoy the banquet," I said with gentle firmness. "Hiding in my consciousness and brooding about cosmic conspiracies isn't going to help either of us process what we've learned." "I'm a Qilin, Arthur," she replied with the kind of dignity that was meant to deflect from her very human emotional responses. "We don't typically attend human social gatherings for entertainment purposes. You know?" I said, moving closer and fixing her with a direct stare. "You keep saying that, But in the end, you're not so different from humans when it comes to feeling hurt or confused or uncertain about relationships that matter to you. Her golden eyes widened slightly at my directness, and I could feel her surprise through our bond at being read so accurately. Or did you think only you could sense emotions through our connection? I continued with gentle persistence. I can feel what you're feeling, Luna. The uncertainty, the worry that learning about my origins somehow changes what we mean to each other. She stayed silent for a long moment, her ancient pride warring with the very real emotional vulnerability that my artificial creation had triggered. Finally, she sighed with the kind of resigned acceptance that suggested I'd accurately identified the source of her distress. "All right, fine," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I'll participate in your human celebration, but only because you're being insufferably persistent about it." "Thank you for such a tremendous favor," I replied with barely contained amusement. "And Luna, don't wrap your arms around my neck from behind this time. Let people see you as the magnificent being you actually are." "Humans," she muttered under her breath as we approached the hall's entrance, though I caught the slight smile that tugged at the corners of her mouth. As we entered the grand ballroom, I immediately noticed that the atmosphere had shifted during my absence. The initial shock of Alisara's dramatic appearance and my subsequent disappearance had given way to tense anticipation, with various groups of dignitaries engaged in quiet conversations that probably involved significant speculation about what had just occurred. But my attention was immediately drawn to the new presence I had detected. A familiar figure whose attendance here spoke to relationships that transcended simple political necessity. "Eva," I said with genuine warmth as I approached the woman whose navy blue hair and purple eyes had been a constant presence during my years at Mythos Academy. Eva Lopez, the headmaster of the most prestigious magical institution on the continent, turned toward me with the kind of measured smile that spoke to years of managing both incredibly gifted students and equally challenging faculty politics. Her radiant rank power signature was perfectly controlled, radiating the kind of calm authority that had made her legendary among magical educators. "Arthur," she replied, her purple eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and something that might have been amazement as she studied my transformed presence. "When I heard that one of my former students had achieved radiant rank and defeated a calamity, I knew I had to see for myself what you'd become." As we spoke, I became aware of another familiar presence approaching with characteristic unhurried steps. Clara Lopez moved through the crowd with the kind of casual grace that marked someone who had grown up around power but never felt the need to display it aggressively. "Arthur," Clara said with a sleepy smile that hadn't changed since our academy days, her navy blue hair falling around her shoulders in waves that caught the ballroom's lighting. Her purple eyes, identical to her mother's, reflected the kind of drowsy contentment that had always marked her approach to social situations. "Clara," I replied with genuine affection, noting how she had grown stronger during the years since we'd last met. Mid-immortal rank was impressive for someone her age, though given her parentage and education, it wasn't entirely surprising. "You look well, still managing to sleep through important events." "I tried," she admitted with the kind of honest regret that suggested she'd actually been looking forward to a nap rather than attending a continental celebration. But Mother insisted that witnessing the rise of the second hero was more important than my normal evening rest schedule. Eva's expression softened with maternal affection as she watched our interaction. "Clara has been following your achievements with considerable interest," she said with the kind of diplomatic phrasing that probably meant her daughter had been one of my more vocal supporters during academy discussions of notable alumni. Luna, who had been observing our conversation with polite interest, stepped forward with the kind of graceful dignity that immediately commanded attention. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," she said with formal courtesy that somehow managed to convey both respect and subtle assertion of her own significant status. "I am Luna, Arthur's bonded companion and partner in recent endeavors." Eva's purple eyes widened slightly as she processed both Luna's obvious power and the way she had chosen to describe their relationship. "A Qilin," she observed with the kind of reverent appreciation that magical scholars reserved for truly legendary beings. "I hadn't realized that any of your kind remained active in mortal affairs." Recent circumstances have required more direct involvement than I initially anticipated, Luna replied diplomatically, though I caught the way she carefully avoided mentioning that she was the only one of her kind, a secret that only she and I shared. The conversation continued for several more minutes, touching on academy memories and theoretical magical frameworks, but my mind was increasingly occupied by weightier concerns. The revelations about my artificial origins, about Luna's unique existence, about the cosmic conspiracies that had shaped both our lives. All of it was building toward a decision I'd been avoiding for far too long. My 5 fiancés deserved to know the truth about who I really was. Not just Arthur Nightingale, the talented young man who had achieved unprecedented power through determination and skill, but the full truth that I was a soul from another world, placed in this body through methods that challenged every assumption about life and death and destiny. They had stood beside me through impossible battles, had chosen to bind their lives to mine despite every political pressure and personal cost. They deserved honesty about the man they had chosen to love. Eva, Clara, I said with genuine appreciation as our conversation began to wind down. Thank you for coming tonight. It means more than you know to have people here who knew me before everything became so complicated. You've grown beyond anything I could have predicted, Eva said quietly, her educator's instincts clearly processing the full scope of my transformation. Not just in power, but in the kind of wisdom that comes from facing impossible choices and finding ways to remain human despite transcending mortal limitations. As they moved away to rejoin the broader celebration, I felt Luna's presence beside me, her golden eyes reflecting understanding of the decision I was wrestling with. You're going to tell them, she said quietly. Not a question but a statement of recognition. They deserve to know, I replied, my gaze finding Rachel, Cecilia, Rose, Serafina, and Reka across the ballroom where they were engaged in animated conversation with some of the assembled dignitaries. If we're going to build a future together, it should be based on complete honesty about who we really are. All of it, Luna asked with gentle concern. Even the parts that might change how they see you? Especially those parts, I said with growing certainty. They fell in love with Arthur Nightingale, but they have a right to know about the soul that inhabits this body, about the life I lived before this one, about the artificial nature of my existence here. The decision settled into my consciousness with the weight of inevitability. Tonight, after the celebration wound down and we had privacy to discuss such profound revelations, I would tell them everything. About Emma and my past life. About being reincarnated into this world. About discovering that even that reincarnation had been artificially orchestrated by forces beyond my understanding. It was time for complete honesty, regardless of the consequences. The celebration continued around us for another hour before I managed to guide my 5 fiancés away from the crowd of dignitaries and well-wishers. The conversation with Eva and Clara had solidified my resolve. They deserved to know the complete truth about who I really was, regardless of how difficult that conversation might be. Arthur, Rachel said with gentle concern as we settled into one of the palace's private sitting rooms. You've seemed distant since you returned from wherever Alisara took you. What happened? I looked around at their faces. Rachel's sapphire eyes reflecting worry, Cecilia's crimson gaze sharp with analytical attention, Rose's brown eyes carrying professional precision that couldn't hide deeper concern, Serafina's ice blue stare radiating calm support, and Reka's violet eyes offering quiet understanding. These 5 women had chosen to bind their lives to mine, had stood beside me through impossible battles, had earned the right to complete honesty. There's something I need to tell you, I said slowly, feeling the weight of revelation settling around us like a heavy cloak. Something I should have shared long ago, but it's complicated enough that I wasn't sure how to begin. Just begin at the beginning, Serafina said with characteristic directness. Whatever it is, we can handle it. I took a deep breath, organizing thoughts and memories I'd been carrying alone for years. The beginning is that I'm not originally from this world. The silence that followed was profound, each of them processing the implications of what I just said in their own way. Not from this world? Cecilia repeated with analytical precision. You mean you're from another continent? Another realm. Another reality entirely, I said with quiet certainty. In my previous life, I lived in a world very different from this one. A world without magic, without monsters, with technology that was decent but still about 3 decades behind what exists here. A world where power came from knowledge and information rather than mana. Rose leaned forward with sharp attention, her mind clearly cataloging every detail for future analysis. Previous life suggests reincarnation rather than simple travel. How did you die? I don't know. I shook my head. It was sudden, as if something hit me out of the blue. More than that, let me explain my life properly. I settled back in my chair, organizing the story in ways that would make sense to people who had never experienced a world without magic. I was an orphan. I began, the words carrying weight that transcended simple description. Abandoned as an infant, raised in institutions that cared more about processing children than nurturing them. But I had a gift, not magical but intellectual. I could understand computer systems, digital networks, information architectures in ways that even adults with decades of training couldn't match. A prodigy, Rachel observed with understanding. More than that, I continued. By the time I was 12, I was breaking into government databases, corporate networks, military systems. Their security was sophisticated by their standards, but nothing like the quantum encryption and neural barriers that exist here. I wasn't being malicious, just curious about how their information systems connected. And that attracted unwanted attention, Reka said with gentle insight. Multiple governments, intelligence agencies, criminal organizations, they all became interested in either recruiting me or eliminating me as a potential threat. I confirmed. A 12-year-old who could access any digital system represented either an invaluable asset or an unacceptable security risk. Cecilia's eyes narrowed with protective anger. So they hunted you. Not when I was younger, but when I got older they did. And to get me, they sent someone they wanted me to trust. I paused, feeling Emma's memory rise to the surface with all the pain and joy that had defined our brief time together. Her name was Emma, I said softly. She appeared to be about my age, and saved me from my bullies in the school I was in. She was sent after you, Rose said with clinical understanding. Yes, I admitted. A child spy trained to get close to me, to earn my trust, to either bring me in or eliminate me if recruitment proved impossible. But something neither of us expected happened. You fell in love, Rachel said with gentle recognition of the emotions underlying my careful recounting. We did. Despite everything, her mission, my paranoia, the impossible circumstances, we fell in love. For almost a year, we lived together, survived together, protected each other from a world that saw us as either assets or threats rather than children. The memory of that year still carried warmth that transcended everything that had come after. Even knowing the truth about Emma's initial purpose, I couldn't regret the happiness we'd found in each other. But it couldn't last, Serafina observed with sad wisdom. Her handlers discovered that she'd compromised her mission by developing genuine feelings for her target. I continued, my voice growing harder as I approached the most painful part of the story. They gave her an ultimatum: complete the mission or face consequences for her failure. What did she choose? Reka asked quietly. She chose me, I said, the words carrying weight that made several of them draw sharp breaths. She revealed the truth about her mission, helped me understand the full scope of what we were facing, and together we tried to disappear completely. For a few weeks, we thought we'd succeeded. But they found you, Cecilia said with growing anger. They found us. And when Emma refused their final demand to complete her mission, I stopped, feeling the old grief rise up despite years of trying to process it. They killed her, made it look like an accident, but I knew they'd murdered her for choosing love over duty. The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief for a girl they'd never met, but whose loss had clearly shaped the man they'd chosen to love. How old were you? Rachel asked with gentle concern. 14, I said simply. Emma and I were both 14 when she died. I spent the next year trying to find the people responsible, using every skill I possessed to hunt down the ones who had taken her from me. Did you succeed? Rose asked with direct intensity. I found them, I confirmed, and I made them pay. But in the process, I pushed myself too hard, took too many risks, made too many enemies. By the time I was 15, there were so many people hunting me that survival became impossible. So they killed you too, Serafina said with ice-cold anger. They tried, I replied. I don't remember the exact moment of death, whether it was an assassination, an accident arranged to look natural, or simply exhaustion from running for so long. All I remember is closing my eyes in that world and opening them in this one. Here, Cecilia observed, in Arthur Nightingale's body. But there's more, I continued. This world, it wasn't completely unfamiliar to me. What do you mean? Rachel asked with growing concern. In my previous world, this reality existed as fiction. A novel called Saga of the Divine Swordsman. A story about heroes and magic and advanced technology that I had read for entertainment during the brief moments when I wasn't running for my life. The silence that followed was profound as they processed the idea that their entire existence might be nothing more than someone else's creative work. Lucifer was the protagonist, I continued, noting how their expressions shifted. The narrative followed his journey from a talented young man to someone who transcended every limitation through determination and skill. And you? Rose asked with sharp focus. I was barely mentioned, I admitted with something that might have been amusement. A minor character who appeared occasionally in the background, whose greatest narrative purpose was probably to make Lucifer look more impressive by comparison. But that's not how things developed, Reka observed quietly. No, I agreed. The moment I arrived in this world with knowledge of what was supposed to happen, everything began to change. My relationships with all of you, my growing power, my impact on major events, none of it matched what I remembered from the story. Because your presence changed the fundamental equations governing this reality, Cecilia said with growing excitement. You weren't just observing the story, you were rewriting it through your actions. And that, I said with growing seriousness, is where things become even more complicated, because there are forces at work in this world that existed beyond the scope of any story, and my presence here wasn't as accidental as I initially believed. I looked around at their faces, seeing understanding, concern, and determination reflected in equal measure. They had processed the first layer of revelation with the kind of strength that made me love them even more deeply. But those explanations will require another conversation, I continued. Tonight, I wanted you to know the truth about who I am, where I come from, and why the man you've chosen to love carries memories of a world none of you have ever seen. Arthur, Rachel said with gentle firmness, do you think any of this changes how we feel about you? The question caught me off guard with its directness. I hoped it wouldn't, but I couldn't be certain. The Arthur we fell in love with is sitting right here, Serafina said with ice-cold certainty. Your memories of another world, your knowledge of some story we were supposedly part of, none of that changes who you are in this moment, in this reality. If anything, Cecilia added with characteristic bluntness, it explains why you've always seemed like you understood things that others missed, why you could see patterns and possibilities that weren't obvious to people who'd lived here their entire lives. And Emma, Rose said with gentle understanding, she was your first love, the one who taught you that connection was possible even in impossible circumstances. That's beautiful, not threatening. We're not competing with a ghost from another world, Reka added with quiet wisdom. We're building something new with the person you became after learning to love and lose and hope again. Their acceptance hit me harder than any battle I'd ever fought, warming places in my heart that I hadn't realized were still cold from years of carrying these secrets alone. Thank you, I said simply, the words inadequate for the relief and gratitude flooding through me. Now, Rachel said with maternal determination, tell us about these other forces you mentioned. What else do we need to know about the world we're living in? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years, as I prepared to share the deeper mysteries that would complete their understanding of just how strange and wonderful and dangerous our reality truly was. That, I said, is going to require a much longer conversation. The next morning found us in the same private sitting room, with breakfast laid out on elegant tables that none of us had touched much. The revelations from the previous night had left everyone processing complex emotions, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. They knew there was more to learn. You said there were forces at work beyond the scope of any story. Rachel began without preamble, her healing instincts apparently having concluded that diving straight into difficult topics was better than prolonged anticipation. What did you mean? I set down my untouched cup of tea, organizing thoughts about cosmic conspiracies and ancient dragons. The novel I read in my previous world ended with Lucifer achieving his goals and becoming the strongest human alive. But it never explained certain mysteries that I've since learned were intentionally omitted from the narrative. Such as? Cecilia asked with sharp focus. Such as why this world experiences regressions, I said quietly. Time loops where reality resets to a specific point, allowing certain individuals to retain their memories while everyone else returns to earlier states of existence. The silence that followed was profound as they processed the implications of what I just revealed. Time loops, Serafina repeated with careful precision. You're saying this reality has happened before? Multiple times, I confirmed. I don't know the exact number, but I've learned that there are at least 3 individuals responsible for causing these regressions. One of them is the original Arthur Nightingale, the soul that was supposed to inhabit this body before my mother replaced him with me. The original Arthur, Rose said with clinical interest. He retained some form of existence despite your mother's intervention? Apparently so, I replied with growing unease, though I don't understand the mechanics of how that's possible. What I do know is that he possesses the power to reset reality when certain conditions are met. And the other 2? Reka asked with quiet concern. One of them is Tiamat, I continued, the radiant dragon who created the Nightingale bloodline. And the 3rd individual. I paused, feeling uncertainty about information I didn't fully possess. I thought it was my mother, but she indicated that even she is merely another piece on the board. Someone else holds that level of power, though I don't know who. The statement landed with significant weight, each of them processing the idea that there were entities operating on scales that made even Alice Nightingale seem limited by comparison. So we're potentially living in one of multiple iterations of the same events, Rachel said with careful neutrality. And if we fail to meet whatever criteria these 3 entities have established, reality could reset and we'd have to face these challenges again. That's my understanding, I replied, though I don't know what specific goals need to be achieved to prevent another regression. And Alisara? Serafina asked with ice-cold directness. Where does she fit into this cosmic structure? She doesn't, I said with growing certainty. She somehow got Emma's memories and changed, which might be why she's so dangerous, Rose observed with sharp insight. She exists outside the cosmic engineering that governs this reality, which means her actions could potentially disrupt whatever purpose the regressions are meant to serve. That's a terrifying possibility, Reka said with quiet understanding. An entity powerful enough to challenge calamities, operating without regard for whatever cosmic balance maintains this world's existence. I nodded with grim agreement. But there's more you need to understand about the fundamental nature of what we're dealing with. Because my existence in this world, my reincarnation into Arthur Nightingale's body, wasn't an accident or natural occurrence. It was orchestrated. By your mother, Rachel said with growing alarm. Yes, she revealed that she killed the original Arthur Nightingale when he was born, then placed an autonomous soul in his body to serve as a placeholder until the right moment for integration. When Arthur entered Mythos Academy, she replaced the temporary soul with mine. The horror of that revelation settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. The casual way my mother had described infanticide, the clinical precision with which she had manipulated souls across dimensional boundaries, it painted a picture of someone whose morality operated on scales they couldn't fully comprehend. She murdered an infant, Rachel whispered with the kind of shocked revulsion that spoke to someone whose entire existence was dedicated to preserving life. Her own child. She sees it differently, I said with resignation. From her perspective, she was preparing a vessel for something more important than individual life. Because the Nightingale family isn't human, not originally. What are you? Serafina asked with direct intensity. We're artificial, I replied, feeling the weight of cosmic truth settling around us. Created by Tiamat, the radiant dragon, the dragon empress whose world was destroyed over 1,000 years ago. I leaned forward, organizing thoughts about ancient history and cosmic engineering. Tiamat fled to Earth after her civilization fell, carrying the accumulated knowledge of what happens when a species fails to protect itself against existential threats. She saw that humanity was too weak, too fragmented, too short-lived to stand against the kinds of forces that destroy worlds. So she created the Nightingales, Cecilia said with growing understanding. A bloodline designed to produce heroes when the world needed them most, I confirmed. Not natural evolution, but deliberate engineering. We're meant to transcend human limitations, to achieve power sufficient to face threats that could endanger the entire planet. And your mother is part of this artificial bloodline, Rose observed, which explains why she orchestrated your reincarnation, Reika said with quiet insight. You weren't just a convenient soul from another world. You were specifically chosen for this purpose. I think so, I agreed, though I'm still not certain about all the criteria involved in the selection process. What I do know is that my knowledge of this world's story, combined with the Nightingale bloodline's artificial advantages, was meant to create someone capable of facing threats that normal heroes couldn't handle. Like calamities, Rachel said with growing understanding. And whatever comes after calamities, I replied with grim certainty, because I don't think Gideon was the end of the threat progression. There are forces at work in this reality that operate on scales that make even the strongest individuals seem insignificant. But if the original Arthur Nightingale retains the power to reset reality, Cecilia said with sharp focus, that suggests he has some form of continued existence despite your mother's intervention. Could he represent a threat to your current identity? No, I shook my head. I already met him and he won't. There's something else, I continued, knowing that complete honesty required sharing even the most unsettling possibilities. Luna, my bonded companion, isn't what she appears to be either. What do you mean? Rachel asked with growing concern. Cheilants are supposed to be ancient, mythical beings with deep connections to natural forces, I explained. But Luna is actually artificial, just like the Nightingales. She's the only Chelan in existence, created for purposes that even she doesn't fully understand. Another engineered component in whatever cosmic plan governs this reality, Rose said with clinical precision. Exactly, I confirmed, which means that both of us, Luna and I, are products of manipulation by forces we're only beginning to comprehend. Our bond, our abilities, our very existence serve purposes that extend far beyond our personal choices or desires. And yet, Reika said with quiet wisdom, you're still choosing to fight against threats like Alisara rather than simply accepting whatever role has been predetermined for you. Because artificial or not, engineered or not, we still have the capacity to make our own decisions about what matters, I replied with growing conviction. Tiamat might have created the Nightingales to produce heroes, but she couldn't control what kind of heroes we choose to become. Which brings us back to the present situation, Cecilia said with practical focus. Alisara represents an immediate threat that operates outside cosmic authority. You possess power that transcends conventional limitation, and there are forces at work that could reset everything if we fail to meet expectations we don't fully understand. That's the situation as I understand it, I confirmed, though I suspect there are layers of complexity that I haven't discovered yet. Then we deal with what we know and prepare for what we don't, Rachel said with maternal determination. You've shared the truth about your origins, about the forces that shaped your existence, about the cosmic engineering that made you what you are. None of that changes the fact that you're the person we've chosen to love. And we're the people who've chosen to stand beside you, Serafina added with ice-cold certainty. regardless of whatever artificial bloodlines or cosmic conspiracies or time loops might be influencing events. The Arthur sitting in this room is real, Rose said with sharp conviction. Your feelings, your choices, your relationships, they're all genuine, regardless of the circumstances that brought you here. And if reality resets, Reika said with quiet strength, if we have to face these challenges again in some other iteration, then we'll face them together again. Because what we've built transcends whatever cosmic engineering might have influenced its beginning. Their acceptance hit me even harder than the previous night's revelations had. Not just tolerance for the artificial nature of my existence, but active embrace of the person I had chosen to become despite those origins. Thank you, I said simply, the words carrying weight that transcended language, for accepting all of this, for choosing to stand with someone whose very existence challenges everything you thought you knew about reality. Now, Cecilia said with characteristic bluntness, what do we do about Alisara? The question hung in the air between us, marking the transition from revelation to action. We had shared the truth about cosmic conspiracies and artificial bloodlines, but the immediate threat remained unchanged. Someone whose power transcended normal classification had developed an obsession with me that operated beyond rational limitation. And dealing with that threat would require every advantage we could muster, artificial or otherwise. After sharing the truth about cosmic conspiracies, artificial bloodlines, and time loops the night before, the morning brought a sense of both relief and lingering tension. The 5 women I loved now understood the full scope of what we were dealing with, but that knowledge came with its own weight of responsibility. There's something else I learned from last night's encounter with Alisara, I said, breaking the contemplative silence that had settled over our breakfast. Something concrete about our immediate situation. What kind of something? Cecilia asked, setting down her cup with sharp attention. I was able to get some idea about how strong Alisara is during our conversation, I said, choosing my words carefully. Even thinking about that twisted garden and her casual dominance made my skin crawl. How strong? Cecilia asked, leaning forward. Peak radiant rank, I replied, watching their faces as that information sank in. After everything I'd told them about cosmic engineering and artificial destinies, this was the most immediate practical concern. Strong enough that I'd need to reach high radiant rank just to pose a real threat to her. Rachel's expression tightened with maternal concern. That's going to take time. She won't just sit around waiting for you to get stronger. Actually, she will, I said, remembering the twisted certainty in Alisara's voice when she'd explained her goals. She won't attack me until it's time. That's the only advantage I have right now. What do you mean? Rose asked with professional curiosity. She wants to break me at my peak, I explained, feeling uncomfortable just saying it out loud. She's not interested in defeating someone who hasn't reached their full potential. In her mind, proving her superiority means waiting until I've achieved everything I'm capable of, then showing me it still isn't enough. That was terrible, Cecilia said bluntly, her chaos magic flickering slightly in response to her anger. It's also our tactical advantage, Reika pointed out with quiet insight. Her obsession gives us time to prepare without facing immediate assault. I leaned back in my chair, feeling mentally drained just thinking about the psychological complexity of Alisara's fixation. There's no point obsessing over Alisara right now. She's too strong for direct confrontation. All I can do is keep getting stronger and hope that when the time comes, I'll be ready. What about other threats? Serafina asked, steering the conversation toward more manageable problems. You mentioned that your knowledge of the original story gave you insight into what we're facing. Well, I've dealt with most of the major problems from the original saga of the Divine Swordsman, I said, mentally cataloging the threats that had been eliminated. The Savage Communion is gone. Lucifer handled the Umbervale Covenant. The Order of Fallen Flame is scattered after what happened with Evelyn, though some remnants probably still exist. So what's left? Rachel asked with practical concern. The Abyssal Kin are still doing their thing in the southern continent, but they're not exactly world-ending, I continued, thinking through the remaining antagonistic forces. They're dangerous on a regional level, but nothing that threatens global stability. I paused, organizing thoughts about threats that existed beyond the original narrative. Honestly, it's mainly just Alisara and whatever demons might still be pulling strings from the background of the Order of the Fallen Flame. Before anyone could respond to that sobering assessment, a familiar voice interrupted from the doorway. "Daddy, are you having important meetings without me again?" Stella walked in with that precise way she moved, her dark eyes immediately cataloging everyone's expressions with mathematical accuracy. I knew serious strategic planning was happening based on facial tension patterns and conversation volume levels. "Not strategic planning," I said with a smile that felt more genuine than it had in days. "Just complicated family discussions about things that are too big for immediate solutions." "About the scary pink lady from last night?" she asked with typical directness. Because everyone got really tense when she showed up, and the probability calculations suggested she represented a significant threat. "Something like that," I confirmed, pulling her closer for a brief hug. "Are you ready to go home soon? I know you've got projects waiting that require proper equipment." Her face lit up with enthusiasm that made everyone else smile despite the heavy topics we'd been discussing. "Yes, the mathematical models I've been working on require proper computational resources, and the palace's systems are frustratingly limited for advanced theoretical work." "Soon," I promised, then looked at the others. "I should probably talk to my parents and Arya before we leave. There are family matters that need addressing after everything that's been revealed." The conversation with my family an hour later carried a different weight than our usual interactions. After learning the truth about my mother's cosmic nature and my own artificial origins, even simple family dynamics felt more complex. "You look different," Arya said, studying me with the kind of sibling intuition that cut through pretense and politics. "Not just stronger. More settled, I guess? Like you've finally figured out something that was bothering you." At 22, my sister had grown into herself in ways that impressed me. Low integration rank was respectable for someone her age, and she carried herself with confidence that hadn't been there when she was younger. But more than her magical development, she'd maintained the direct honesty that made her such an anchor to normalcy. "I feel more settled," I admitted, thinking about the relief that came from finally sharing the truth about my origins and the cosmic forces shaping our reality. Finally told some people the truth about things I'd been keeping to myself for years. "Good," she said simply, with the kind of practical wisdom that cut through complexity. "Secrets make you weird, and you were getting progressively weirder." Douglas cleared his throat with paternal authority. "Arthur, what you've accomplished. I'm proud of you, but I'm also concerned about what comes next. The scale of threats you're facing seems to be escalating beyond anything normal people can comprehend." "Nothing too dramatic," I replied, though we both knew that was probably optimistic. "I go home, spend time with people I care about, keep training, try to have something resembling a normal life between cosmic crises." "And the threats you're facing?" Arya asked with growing concern. "Are they really that far beyond what normal people can handle?" "Some of them," I said honestly, not wanting to lie but also not wanting to burden them with the full scope of what peak radiant rank entities could accomplish. "But that doesn't make normal people unimportant. Stella contributes more to keeping me grounded and sane than most continental-level fighters do." Alice had been quiet through most of this conversation, but now she spoke up with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was choosing her words precisely. "What do you need from us?" The question was simple on the surface, but I could hear the layers underneath it. She was asking as a mother who loved her son, but also as someone who understood cosmic responsibilities better than anyone else in the room. After last night's revelations about her true nature, every interaction carried additional weight. "Just be my family," I said with absolute sincerity. "That's all I've ever needed, and it's all I need now. Whatever cosmic purposes or artificial destinies might be involved, the most important thing you can do is remain the people who raised me and loved me." "We can do that," Douglas said with the kind of paternal certainty that had anchored my early years in this world. "No matter how complicated things get, you'll always be our son." When will you visit again? Arya asked with characteristic directness. Because if you disappear for months again without proper communication, I'm hunting you down personally. And I'm stronger now, so that's a legitimate threat. Sooner than last time, I promised with genuine conviction. The Western continent's major problems are solved, which means I don't have to worry about putting you in danger just by being around. The association with me should be safer now that the primary threat actors have been eliminated. Good, she said with satisfaction. Because no matter how ridiculously overpowered you get, you're still my annoying older brother, and I have a responsibility to keep you humble. The family dynamic felt both completely normal and subtly changed by everything that had been revealed. Alice's hidden nature, my artificial origins, the cosmic forces shaping our reality. All of it existed in the background of simple familial affection that transcended any amount of cosmic engineering. 2 hours later, I stood in the palace courtyard with Luna, Stella, and my 5 fiancés, ready to head home. The Western continent's business was finished, threats eliminated, alliances strengthened, my new status as the second hero officially recognized by every major power center. Ready? Rachel asked, already organizing our departure with typical maternal efficiency. More than ready? I replied, feeling lighter than I had in ages. The weight of secrets was finally off my shoulders, and the people I loved most knew the truth about who I really was. It feels like it's been years since we've had time to just exist without continental-level crises demanding immediate attention. Home, Stella said with deep satisfaction that made everyone smile. Where the equipment actually works and I don't have to explain mathematical concepts to people who think magic is more important than proper data analysis. Where we can have normal conversations about normal things, Cecilia added with something approaching wistfulness. Where the biggest decision is what to have for dinner rather than how to prevent apocalyptic scenarios, Rose said with professional relief. Where we can train and grow stronger without the pressure of immediate existential threats, Serafina observed. Where we can just be together, Reika said quietly, and that simple statement captured everything that mattered most. Home, I agreed. I had a lot of stuff to do when I returned home. Being the second hero came with responsibilities I hadn't fully anticipated. Sure, I'd expected some level of increased attention and political complexity, but the sheer volume of administrative work was staggering. On top of that, I was still the guild grandmaster sitting atop all guilds across the 5 continents, which meant every major decision required my input or approval. The subjugation of 2 major cults had created a massive backlog of work. Territory redistribution where cult strongholds had been eliminated, resource allocation for rebuilding efforts, political realignments as power vacuums were filled by more legitimate authorities. It all required careful attention to prevent the kind of instability that could spawn new problems. But administrative duties, while important, weren't my primary focus. I had training goals that couldn't be delayed if I wanted to be ready for whatever came next. First, I had promised Mo Zenith that I would elevate Mount Hua's Grade 6 art, the Violet Mist Divine Art, by creating a 5th movement. The problem was that before I could improve upon something, I needed to master it completely. So I was spending considerable time learning the art's existing 4 movements, understanding the philosophical foundations that made it so effective. Second, I was working on stabilizing my body so I could fully absorb Bahamut's Dragon Heart and break through to mid-radiant rank. The process was delicate. Rushing it could cause permanent damage to my mana pathways, but taking too long left me vulnerable to threats that were already stronger than my current capabilities. The political rewards from our recent victories had been substantial, though not unexpected. Quinn Slatemark had promoted Rose's father to Duke Springshaper, recognizing both his contributions to imperial administration and his daughter's role in defeating a calamity. Reika had been offered a Martianist title for her work in the subjugation of the second calamity, which she'd accepted after considering the benefits it would provide for her foster parents. All 5 of my fiancés had received the Star of Valor from the Western continent, along with substantial land grants, monetary rewards, and artifact collections. I'd gotten the same honors, though honestly I was more focused on making sure they had everything they needed. The only thing left on my list for them was helping each acquire legendary grade artifacts that would complement their fighting styles. Arthur, Focus. Seraphina's calm, soft voice snapped me out of my thoughts as she guided me through the process of blossoming plum blossoms. We were in the training garden behind our home, surrounded by plum trees that had been specifically cultivated for practicing the Mount Hua techniques. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows across the carefully maintained grounds. Currently, I was attempting to make the blossoms bloom not through the traditional method of channeling mana according to Mount Hua principles, but through my own unique approach using gray energy. Seraphina had mastered the technique years ago, combining her powerful elven ice magic with the supernatural enhancement from her ice crystal jade body to create displays of impossible beauty. Sorry, I said, refocusing on the branch in my hands. Too many things competing for attention. That's exactly the problem, she replied with gentle firmness, moving to stand behind me. Her presence was calming in a way that had nothing to do with magic. Just the simple comfort of having someone who understood both the technical challenges and the emotional weight of what I was trying to accomplish. The Violet Mist Divine Art isn't about forcing results through raw power, she continued, her hands settling lightly on my shoulders. It's about understanding the natural flow of life energy and working with it rather than against it. I nodded, trying to clear my mind of administrative concerns and political complexities. The branch in my hands was from a tree that had been dormant for months, its buds sealed tight against the changing seasons. Traditional Mount Hua techniques would coax them open through careful application of mana that mimicked spring's warming influence. But I wasn't trying to replicate spring. I was attempting something far more complex, using gray energy to create the kind of balance between opposing forces that would convince the blossoms they could safely emerge regardless of external conditions. Feel the potential within the branch, Seraphina said softly, her breath warm against my ear. Every bud contains the possibility of beauty, but it's waiting for the right conditions to manifest. I closed my eyes, extending my enhanced senses into the dormant wood. There I could feel it, the compressed life force waiting within each sealed bud, the genetic programming that would respond to the proper stimuli. But understanding the mechanism and successfully triggering it were entirely different challenges. Gray energy began to flow through my hands in carefully controlled patterns. Not the overwhelming torrent I'd used against Gideon, but precise applications that sought to create the exact balance necessary for healthy growth. The space between creation and destruction, between dormancy and activity, between potential and manifestation. For a moment, I thought I felt something respond. The smallest bud on the branch seemed to tremble slightly, as if considering whether to trust the energy I was offering. Then nothing. The branch remained stubbornly dormant, its buds sealed as tightly as when I'd begun. Damn, I muttered, opening my eyes to stare at my apparently failed attempt. Language, Seraphina said with amusement, though her tone carried understanding rather than criticism. And you're being too impatient. This isn't a technique you master in an afternoon. I've been working on it for weeks, I protested, though even as I said it I realized how ridiculous that sounded. Most grade 6 arts took years to master completely, and I was attempting to adapt one using energy that operated on principles no one else fully understood. And you've made progress, she pointed out with characteristic insight. 3 weeks ago, you couldn't even maintain gray energy at the delicate levels this technique requires. Now you're actually channeling it through organic matter without causing cellular damage. She was right, though it was easy to lose sight of incremental progress when the visible results were so minimal. The fact that I could manipulate gray energy precisely enough to work with living tissue was actually a significant achievement. Show me again, I said, offering her the branch. I want to see how it's supposed to feel when it works. Seraphina accepted the branch with the kind of reverent care that marked someone who truly understood what they were working with. Her ice magic began to flow immediately, but this wasn't the combat-focused power I'd seen her use in battle. This was something far more subtle and complex. Frost formed along the branch's surface, but it wasn't the killing cold that would damage living tissue. Instead, it was the kind of careful chill that triggered dormancy-breaking responses, mimicking the precise temperature changes that would naturally occur during the transition from winter to spring. Her ice crystal jade body enhancement became visible as crystalline patterns spread across her skin, adding supernatural precision to her already considerable control. The frost patterns began to shift and dance, creating microenvironments along the branch that addressed each bud's individual needs. Then, like magic, which it was but also something more, the blossoms began to open. It started with the smallest buds, pale pink petals unfurling with impossible grace. Then larger ones followed, until the entire branch was covered in flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The fragrance that filled the air was intoxicating, carrying notes of spring and renewal and hope. "Beautiful," I said softly, genuinely awed despite having seen her perform this technique dozens of times. "It's not about the result," Serafina said, though I could see the quiet pride in her ice-blue eyes. "It's about understanding that you're not forcing anything to happen. You're simply creating the conditions where natural beauty can manifest." She handed the flowering branch back to me, and I could feel the life energy still pulsing through the open blossoms. "Now you try, but this time, don't think about gray energy as something you're imposing on the branch. Think of it as a conversation. You're asking the buds what they need, then providing it." I accepted the branch, noting how the already open blossoms seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes again and tried to approach the problem from a completely different angle. Instead of focusing on what I wanted to accomplish, I tried to understand what the remaining unopened buds were telling me. What conditions were they waiting for? What balance of forces would convince them it was safe to emerge? Gray energy flowed through my hands again, but this time I wasn't trying to direct it toward any specific outcome. Instead, I was simply offering it as a resource, letting the branch's natural systems determine how to use it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a single bud, smaller than the others, began to stir. It was the tiniest movement, barely visible, but I could feel it through the connection gray energy had created between us. The bud was testing the energy I was offering, determining whether it could trust this unfamiliar source of nourishment. "There," Serafina whispered, her hand finding mine where it touched the branch. "Feel that? You're not forcing it. You're inviting it." The bud continued its cautious exploration of the gray energy, and I tried to remain as still and patient as possible. This wasn't about demonstrating power or achieving rapid results. This was about building trust with something that operated on completely different principles than combat magic. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the bud began to swell. Then, like a small miracle, it opened. The blossom that emerged was unlike the others Serafina had coaxed forth. Where hers had been pale pink and traditionally beautiful, mine was something entirely new. Petals that seemed to shift between silver and violet, with edges that caught light in ways that suggested depth beyond normal perception. "Oh," Serafina breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "Arthur, that's not a normal plum blossom." She was right. The flower I'd helped manifest carried traces of gray energy woven into its very structure, creating something that was both natural and transcendent. It was still recognizably a plum blossom, but enhanced in ways that spoke to the space between ordinary and extraordinary. "Is it healthy?" I asked with sudden concern. "I didn't damage it by mixing gray energy into its development, did I?" "Look at it," she said with gentle amusement. "Does it look damaged to you?" I studied the unique blossom more carefully, noting how it seemed to pulse with its own inner rhythm. The gray energy hadn't corrupted or altered its fundamental nature. Instead, it had enhanced the blossom's natural beauty in ways that made it more itself rather than something else. "One success out of dozens of attempts," I said with rueful acknowledgement of how much work remained ahead of me. "One success that proves the approach is viable," Serafina corrected with warm encouragement. "You've just demonstrated that gray energy can work in harmony with natural processes rather than overwhelming them. That's a significant breakthrough." She was right, though I could see it would take considerable practice before I could reliably achieve results. But the foundation was there, the understanding that gray wasn't just about combat applications, but about finding balance in all aspects of existence. "Thank you," I said, turning to face her fully, "for the patience, for the guidance, for everything. Thank you for trusting me enough to learn something that matters to my family's traditions, she replied, her ice blue eyes reflecting depths of emotion that had nothing to do with magical technique, and for creating something beautiful in the process. The weeks following our return home had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost normal, despite the cosmic responsibilities weighing on my shoulders. While I focused on training and managing guild affairs, my fiancés had their own priorities to address. Rachel had returned to the northern continent 3 days after our arrival, called back by urgent family business that couldn't be delayed. The Creighton family was in the process of absorbing the vast territories that had once been under Umbervale Covenant control, a massive undertaking that required careful political maneuvering and practical administration. The land redistribution alone will take months, she had explained during our last breakfast together before her departure. But the real challenge is the miasma contamination. Centuries of cult activity have left the soil itself corrupted in ways that normal purification methods can't address. As one of the most powerful pure light users in the world, Rachel was uniquely qualified to handle such large-scale purification work. Her abilities could cleanse not just surface contamination, but the deep spiritual pollution that cult activities left behind. Without her intervention, the reclaimed territories would remain uninhabitable for generations. "I'll be back as soon as the critical work is finished," she had promised, her sapphire eyes reflecting the same maternal concern that always surfaced when she worried about leaving me to handle things alone. A month, maybe 2 at most. Reka had her own territorial responsibilities to manage. Her new status as Marchioness Reka Solien came with substantial land grants in the Slatemark Empire, rewards for her crucial role in defeating the Second Calamity. More importantly, the position provided her with the resources and authority needed to properly care for her foster parents. "They've never lived anywhere this grand," she had said with quiet satisfaction as she reviewed the architectural plans for the manor being constructed on her new lands. "After everything they did for me when I had nothing, I want to make sure they're comfortable for the rest of their lives." The administrative work was keeping her busy, but I could see how much the responsibility meant to her. For someone who had grown up without family, being able to provide security and comfort for the people who had taken her in was worth more than any political recognition. Rose and Cecilia had remained closer to home, helping me manage the expanded guild operations and political complexities that came with our new status. But even they were spending increasing amounts of time on travel, visiting various continental headquarters to ensure smooth transitions as we absorbed former cult territories into legitimate guild oversight. Which left me training primarily with Seraphina, working to master the Violet Mist divine art while simultaneously stabilizing before devouring Bahamut's dragon heart. It was demanding work, but having her guidance made the technical challenges manageable. "Your control has improved significantly," she observed as we concluded another session with the plum blossoms. I'd managed to coax 3 more blooms to open using gray energy, each one carrying the same unique silver-violet coloration that marked them as something beyond ordinary. "Still not consistent enough?" I replied, studying the branch where several buds remained stubbornly closed. "At this rate, it'll take months before I can reliably use the technique in actual combat situations." "Patience," she said with gentle amusement. "Grade 6 sword arts aren't meant to be modified by such a degree in weeks. The fact that you're making any progress at all is remarkable." Before I could respond, I sensed a familiar presence approaching through our home's gardens. Luna materialized at the edge of the training area, her adult form moving with the graceful precision that marked her as something beyond human classification. "Arthur," she said, her golden eyes reflecting something that might have been determination mixed with reluctance. "I need to speak with you about something important." "Of course," I replied, setting down the flowering branch while Seraphina stepped back to give us privacy. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about our recent battles," Luna began, her amethyst hair catching the afternoon light as she moved closer. "About how much stronger you've become and how limited my contributions have been in comparison." I frowned at the self-critical tone in her voice. "Luna, your support has been crucial to everything I've accomplished. The bond between us is what makes most of my advanced techniques possible." "I know that," she said with the kind of gentle patience that suggested she'd expected this response. But I'm also aware that I'm currently at low radiant rank while you're approaching mid-radiant rank. The gap between our capabilities is growing, and that could become a liability in future confrontations. She was right, though I didn't particularly like hearing it stated so directly. Luna's power had grown alongside mine throughout our partnership, but the recent exponential increase in threats we were facing meant that even radiant rank entities could find themselves outclassed quickly. "What are you proposing?" I asked, though something in her expression suggested I already knew the answer. "I want to go south," she said with quiet certainty. "To meet with Tiamat again. She's the one who created me, who understands my artificial nature better than anyone else. If there's a way for me to grow stronger more rapidly, she'll know what it is." The request hit me harder than I'd expected. Luna had been my constant companion for years, her presence so integral to my daily existence that the idea of separation felt fundamentally wrong. But I also understood her reasoning. If she felt limited by her current capabilities, then helping her overcome those limitations was the responsible choice. "How long would you be gone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the reluctance I felt. "I'm not certain," she admitted with honest uncertainty. "It could be weeks or it could be months. But I need to try, Arthur. For both of us." I studied her face, seeing the resolve that had already crystallized into firm decision. This wasn't really a request for permission. It was notification of something she'd already committed to doing. The fact that she was discussing it with me spoke to respect for our partnership rather than uncertainty about her choice. "When would you leave?" I asked, accepting the inevitable while trying to focus on practical considerations. "Tonight," she said simply. "There's no point in delaying once the decision is made. And honestly, the longer I wait, the harder it will be to actually go through with leaving you." The casual admission of emotional attachment made something warm spread through my chest despite the circumstances. Luna's feelings about our bond were usually expressed through actions rather than words, so hearing her acknowledge the difficulty of separation was both touching and concerning. "It's dangerous to travel alone," I pointed out, though even as I said it I realized how ridiculous the concern was. Luna was a radiant rank Qilin whose abilities operated on principles that most entities couldn't even comprehend. "I'll contact you immediately if there's any real danger," she promised with the kind of patient amusement that suggested she'd expected this objection. "And honestly, aside from Alisara, there isn't anyone or anything on this planet that could seriously threaten me. Most threats would have trouble even detecting my presence if I didn't want them to." She was right about that. Luna's artificial nature gave her capabilities that transcended normal Qilin abilities, including the kind of dimensional manipulation that made her nearly untouchable when she chose to be. "Besides," she continued with a slight smile, "Tiamat's territory is probably the safest place on Earth for someone like me." I nodded slowly, recognizing that my concerns were more emotional than practical. Luna was incredibly capable, her destination was secure, and her reasoning for the journey was sound. The reluctance I felt was purely selfish, the simple fact that I'd grown accustomed to having her presence as a constant anchor. "All right," I said finally, pulling her into a careful embrace. "Go get stronger. But promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll come back as soon as you've accomplished what you're setting out to do." "I promise," she replied, her arms tightening around me with surprising strength. "Thank you for understanding, for not trying to talk me out of something I need to do. Thank you for trusting me enough to explain rather than just disappearing," I replied, thinking about how different this conversation could have gone if she'd simply vanished without warning. We stood there for several moments, both of us processing the reality of impending separation. Finally, Luna pulled back enough to meet my eyes directly. "You're the best contractor anyone could ask for," she said with the kind of sincere affection that transcended simple professional appreciation. "Most beings like me never get to experience the kind of partnership we've built. I'm grateful for that, regardless of what else happens."
Luna.
"Take care of yourself while I'm gone," she interrupted with gentle firmness. "Train hard, but don't push beyond what Rachel would consider safe. And remember that being strong enough to protect everyone doesn't mean you have to carry every burden alone." Before I could respond, she stepped back and began to shimmer with the kind of dimensional energy that marked her departure preparations. "I'll be back before you know it," she said with a smile that managed to be both reassuring and heartbreaking. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of starlight and the echo of amethyst hair catching afternoon sun. I stood in the suddenly empty garden for several minutes, processing the strange hollow feeling that came from Luna's absence. It wasn't just the loss of her physical presence. It was the sudden quiet in my consciousness where her mental voice usually provided commentary and companionship. "She'll be fine," Serafina said softly, her hand finding my shoulder with comforting warmth. "Luna is remarkably capable, and her instincts for self-preservation are excellent. This separation is temporary." "I know," I replied, though knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were entirely different experiences. "It's just strange. She's been a constant presence for so long that I'd forgotten what it feels like to not have her voice in my head." "It will help you both grow," Serafina observed with characteristic insight. "Luna needs to explore her own potential without constantly adapting to support your needs. And you need to remember how to operate independently of the bond that's shaped so much of your development." She was probably right, though that didn't make the immediate adjustment any easier. But before I could dwell on Luna's departure any further, the sound of rapid footsteps drew our attention toward the house. Serafina's expression shifted to immediate alertness as she recognized something in the approaching movement pattern. "That's urgent," she said with growing concern. A moment later, one of the household staff appeared at the garden's edge, his face pale with the kind of controlled panic that suggested serious problems. "Lady Serafina," he said with careful formality that couldn't hide underlying distress. "There's been a message from the Mount Hua sect. It's marked as emergency priority." Serafina's ice-blue eyes narrowed with immediate focus as she accepted the sealed communication. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency as she broke the magical seals that protected high-priority sect correspondence. As she read, I watched her expression shift from professional attention to genuine alarm. "What is it?" I asked, though something in her body language suggested I wasn't going to like the answer. "Ran has gone missing," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of controlled tension that marked someone processing unexpected crisis. The emergency meeting convened in our home's communication chamber within the hour. Rose and Cecilia had been pulled away from their respective guild administration duties, while magical holograms flickered to life as Rachel and Reika joined us from their distant locations. "This better be genuinely urgent," Rachel said through the holographic projection, though her concern was evident despite the slight delay in transmission. "I'm in the middle of purifying a particularly stubborn miasma contamination that's been resisting conventional methods." "It is," Serafina replied with uncharacteristic terseness, her ice-blue eyes reflecting stress that went deeper than simple professional concern. "Ren has been missing for 3 days." The shift in atmosphere was immediate. All 5 women understood the implications. Ren was the heir to the Kagu family, one of the former 7 superpowers of the world and still the second most powerful family in the Eastern continent. His disappearance carried ramifications that extended far beyond personal concern. "Tell us everything," Rose said with sharp attention, her analytical mind already working through potential scenarios. "What were the circumstances of his disappearance?" Serafina activated the holographic display, showing a detailed map of the Eastern continent with specific locations marked. "He was traveling between Kagu family estates in his personal transport vehicle, a routine journey he's made dozens of times. Standard security protocols were in place, armed escort, communication checkpoints, predetermined route with backup alternatives." "Who was the last person to see him?" Cecilia asked, her crimson eyes scanning the tactical information with increasing intensity. "The security checkpoint at Millhaven Transit Hub," Serafina replied. "His convoy passed through right on schedule at 14:30 local time. When they failed to reach the next checkpoint 6 hours later, search operations began immediately." "And they found what?" Reika's holographic form leaned forward with concern. "His transport vehicle, abandoned on a secondary route with no signs of struggle," Serafina said with frustration that made the air around her seem to chill slightly. All security systems were still active. No damage to the vehicle. No indication that the passengers had been forced to leave. They simply vanished. I studied the route display more carefully, noting details that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. This doesn't look like a normal kidnapping or assassination attempt. Anyone targeting the Kagu Air would expect significant resistance from his security detail. Exactly, Serafina confirmed with grim agreement. Ren's escort included 2 immortal rank combatants, and Ren himself is at peak immortal rank. The timing is suspicious, Rose acknowledged with analytical precision. Political rivals might see this as an opportunity to eliminate the next generation of Kagu leadership while the family is weakened. But which rivals have the capability to make Ren disappear without trace? Cecilia pointed out darkly. Even with Celine incapacitated, the Kagu family still commands significant resources and protection. I felt a familiar cold weight settling in my stomach as I considered possibilities that extended beyond simple political maneuvering. The timing bothers me. Luna just left for the southern continent to meet with Tiamat, and now Ren disappears during what should have been a routine journey. That could be coincidence, but coincidences involving people close to you tend to be anything but coincidental. Reika finished with quiet understanding. What's your instinct telling you? Rachel asked directly, her maternal concern evident even through the holographic transmission. You've developed good intuition for when events are connected to larger patterns. I considered the question carefully, weighing the available information against the broader context of recent events. Something about this feels significant, not just political maneuvering or family rivalry, but part of something bigger that we haven't identified yet. The method bothers me most, I continued, studying the tactical display. Making people vanish without triggering any defensive systems means that either a powerful gift was involved or Alisara herself. Which means investigation is necessary, Serafina said with the kind of cold determination that marked someone preparing for action. I need to return to the eastern continent immediately. The Mount Hua sect will expect my involvement in any serious search effort. You're not going alone, I said firmly, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. If this is connected to larger threats, having backup could be crucial. And if it's not, having additional perspectives might help identify details that single investigator approaches would miss. Arthur, Rose said with careful concern. You're needed here for guild administration and political coordination. Disappearing to the eastern continent right now could create complications with the territorial absorption processes. The guild operations can function without me for a few weeks, I replied with growing certainty. Rose, you and Reika have been handling most of the practical administration anyway. And if this situation is what my instincts suggest it might be, addressing it quickly could prevent much larger problems. Rachel's hologram shifted as she considered the broader implications. The eastern continent will be destabilized if the second strongest force is weakened even more. And if this is part of a larger pattern targeting specific individuals or families, Serafina added grimly, then waiting for more information could mean allowing the situation to escalate beyond manageable levels. I agree with Arthur's assessment, Cecilia said after a moment of consideration. The potential risks of ignoring this outweigh the administrative inconvenience of temporarily redistributing responsibilities. Rose and I can handle guild coordination, she continued with characteristic confidence. Rachel, how critical is your immediate presence for the purification work? I can delegate the technical aspects to other Purelight users for a few weeks, Rachel replied with reluctant acceptance. The contamination will take longer to address, but it won't get worse without my direct intervention. Should I return to help with investigation? Reika asked through her hologram. My territorial administration can function with deputy oversight. Not yet, I decided after brief consideration. If this develops into something requiring additional support, we'll contact everyone immediately. But for now, having people positioned across multiple continents provides better strategic flexibility. Agreed, Serafina said with appreciation for the tactical reasoning. If something is targeting specific individuals or families, Spreading our assets reduces the chance of comprehensive disruption. When do we leave? I asked, already mentally organizing the preparations necessary for travel to the eastern continent. Tomorrow morning, Serafina replied without hesitation. Every hour of delay makes the trail colder and reduces our chances of finding useful information. I'll arrange high-speed transport and secure communications, Rose said with efficient planning already evident in her voice. Quantum encrypted channels and emergency extraction protocols in case the situation escalates. Emergency supplies and backup equipment, Cecilia added with practical focus. If you're walking into an unknown threat situation, having redundant resources could be crucial. Coordinate with the Kagu Family Council, Rachel suggested through her hologram. They'll have detailed information about Ren's specific itinerary and any unusual activity in their territory. Already planned, Serafina confirmed. And Arthur, Reka said with quiet intensity. Be careful. Your instincts about connected patterns have been accurate before, but they've also led you into situations that nearly got you killed. I'll be careful, I promised. Though we all knew that careful had relative meaning when dealing with threats that could make superpower heirs vanish without trace. No unnecessary risks, Rachel added with maternal firmness. Run is important, but you can't help him if you get yourself captured or killed in the process. Understood, I replied, appreciating the concern while recognizing the impossibility of guaranteeing safety when walking into unknown situations. Regular check-ins, Cecilia insisted with characteristic intensity. Every 12 hours minimum, more frequently if circumstances permit. If we don't hear from you on schedule, we mobilize everyone for rescue operations. Agreed, Serafina said with understanding. It was time for us to go to the east. I love afternoons like this, when it's just me and Daddy in his study and nobody needs him to save the world or make important decisions. He's reviewing some boring guild reports on his holographic display, but I don't mind. Sometimes it's nice just being in the same room, even when we're doing different things. The soft blue glow from his screens makes everything feel cozy and peaceful. You're staring again, Daddy says without looking up from the floating documents. I wasn't staring. I was thinking, I protest, curling my legs up under me in the big reading chair that's basically become mine. It's this super comfortable smart chair that adjusts to however I want to sit. There's a difference. Dangerous territory with you, he says with that smile that makes his whole face look different. What were you thinking about? You've been really busy since we got back from the Western continent. I get why, but I miss having time like this. I fidget with my tablet where I'd been working on some drawings. When it's just us, you know? No emergency calls or hologram meetings or people needing the second hero for important stuff. Daddy waves his hand and the holographic reports disappear, then turns his chair to face me properly. I miss it too. Being the second hero comes with way more administrative work than I expected. Sometimes I think fighting calamities was easier than dealing with all the paperwork. Paperwork is stupid, I say, which makes him laugh. Completely agree. But necessary stupid. He stands up and stretches. What do you want to do with our admin-free afternoon? The question makes me bounce a little in my chair because when Daddy asks what I want to do, he really means it. He won't check his communicator or get distracted by guild stuff. For however long we have, I'm the most important thing, and that feeling is better than anything. Can we work on that transportation thing I showed you last week? I ask hopefully. I had some new ideas about your gray energy and how it might work with regular technology. Of course, he says, already clearing space on his desk and activating a larger holographic workspace. Show me what you've been thinking about. I practically jump out of my chair to grab my tablet, then sync it with his display system. My drawings and notes appear in the air between us in full color. They're not amazing art or anything, but they show what I mean. Sleek vehicles that could use gray energy somehow. So I was thinking, I start manipulating the hologram to show my favorite design. I know you can teleport yourself instantly anywhere you want using gray energy, but what if we could make vehicles that use some of that same principle? Daddy leans forward, studying my sketches with real interest. Tell me more about how you think that would work. Well, your teleportation works because gray energy exists between different states, right? Like, between being here and being there. I pull up another drawing that shows what I imagine the energy looking like. So what if we could build vehicles that use that same idea, but instead of instant teleportation, they could just go really, really fast? He pauses, rotating the hologram to look at it from different angles. Actually, that's really clever, Stella. I hadn't thought about applying gray energy principles to transportation technology. His praise makes me feel warm and proud. Daddy never says things are good just to be nice. When he says something's clever, he means it. I think it could revolutionize how people travel. I continue excitedly. Like, instead of taking hours to fly between continents, maybe it would only take minutes. And it wouldn't need those huge fusion cores that regular aircraft use. Walk me through how you think the interface would work, he says, pulling up additional design tools so we can modify my drawings together. For the next hour, we dive deep into my ideas. Daddy asks questions that help me think through problems I hadn't considered, and he shows me things about gray energy that give me new ideas. We redesign the vehicles together, adding details and solving technical challenges. The tricky part would be making it safe for passengers. I explain, adding safety systems to our design. Your teleportation only works for you because you can control gray energy directly. But regular people would need some kind of protection system. What if we designed containment fields that could extend gray energy properties to everything inside them? Daddy suggests sketching out his idea in the hologram. Yes, like a bubble of gray energy that could move through space. I get excited and start drawing faster. And we could have multiple safety backups in case anything went wrong. You could change how civilization works, Daddy says, and his eyes have that bright look he gets when he's really fascinated by something. This is the kind of innovation that could make the world fundamentally different. Really? I ask, even though I can tell from his voice that he means it. Really? He confirms. Then reaches over to mess up my hair in that gentle way that doesn't actually mess it up. You have an incredible imagination, kiddo. I love seeing how your mind works. That's what I love most about time with Daddy. He doesn't think I'm weird for having big ideas or for seeing things differently than other kids my age. He just listens like everything I say matters, like my thoughts are as important as any adult's. What else have you been working on? He asks, settling back in his chair. I pull up another section of my tablet where I'd been sketching different things. I've been thinking about combat applications too, like watching how you fight and trying to understand patterns. Patterns in fighting? Yeah. Most people have habits when they're in battle. They favor certain moves, or they react predictably when they're surprised or scared. I show him my drawings of different fighting stances and techniques. So if you could predict what someone's going to do next, you could counter it before they even finish the move. You've been analyzing combat techniques, he says, sounding both impressed and amused. I analyze everything, I admit with a shrug. People are interesting. Like, you always put yourself between danger and other people, even when there might be smarter tactical options. And when someone you care about is threatened, you get this look in your eyes and you stop thinking about your own safety completely. Daddy goes quiet for a moment, and I wonder if I said something wrong. Sometimes adults get uncomfortable when I notice things about them that they don't realize they do. Does that worry you? He asks seriously. I think about it for a few seconds. Kind of. You get hurt a lot because you protect people instead of protecting yourself first. But I pause, trying to find the right words. You wouldn't be you if you didn't care about people that much. That's what makes you a real hero, not just someone with strong powers. Smart and wise, he says softly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. How did I get so lucky to have you in my life? It wasn't luck, I say matter-of-factly. You chose to care about me even though I'm different from other kids and think about strange things. That was a decision you made. Best decision I ever made, he says with that voice he uses when he's being completely serious. We keep working on projects for another hour. Daddy shows me some new applications of gray energy that I'd never thought of, and I show him more of my vehicle designs and combat analysis. We build on each other's ideas, making them better and more detailed. It's perfect. Just us, sharing cool thoughts and creating things together. But then I start noticing the little changes that mean our time is ending. The way his eyes occasionally flick toward his communication device when it chimes softly. How his shoulders get a bit tense. The expression that crosses his face when he's thinking about responsibilities beyond our conversation. You have to leave somewhere, don't you? I say quietly, minimizing our holographic workspace. Daddy sighs, and I can see the regret in his expression. How did you know? You get this look when something important is happening that you need to deal with. I save our work and close my tablet slowly. And Serafina's been tense all day. I noticed it at breakfast. She was doing that thing where she gets really focused and quiet when she's worried. Stella. He starts, using that careful voice he has when he needs to tell me something I won't like. It's about Run, isn't it? I ask because I caught enough fragments of conversation to piece together the basic situation. He's missing and you're going to the Eastern continent to help find him. Yes, he says, not trying to hide it from me. He never treats me like I'm too young to understand important things. Serafina and I leave tomorrow morning. Even though I was expecting it, hearing him confirm it makes my chest feel tight and hollow. How long will you be gone? I don't know, he admits honestly. Hopefully not long, but investigations are unpredictable. Could be a few days or it could be longer. I nod, trying to keep my expression neutral even though I hate the idea of him leaving. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too, he says, getting up and pulling me into one of his careful hugs that always make everything feel safer. But Rose and Cecilia will be here, and you've got your projects to keep you busy. Plus, with the new hologram system, we can talk every day. I know. I mumble against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent that just smells like safety and home. And I understand why you have to go. If someone took Ren, ignoring it would just make things worse later. When did you become so understanding about complicated grown-up situations? He asks, sounding amazed. You always explain things to me instead of just saying, because I said so, or you're too young to understand. I tell him honestly. It's easier to accept things I don't like when I know why they have to happen. I love you, Stella, he says seriously, his arms tightening around me. That doesn't change no matter where I have to go or what I have to do. You're one of the most important things in my world. I love you too, Daddy. I say back, holding on tight for just a few more seconds before I have to let go. Because sometimes, even when you really don't want something to happen, you accept it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And because the people you love most are worth supporting, even when it's hard. After spending the day with Stella, it was time for me to depart for the Eastern continent with Serafina. The goodbye with my family had been brief but warm. My parents and Arya seeing us off with the kind of casual affection that made leaving easier. My mother still acted like everything was completely normal despite having revealed her true cosmic nature to me, which was honestly a bit jarring. But I was getting used to the idea that she wanted to maintain the facade for Douglas and Arya's sake. Some secrets were meant to protect the people we loved from truths they weren't ready to handle. Serafina and I reached Mount Hua Sect through one of the advanced warp gate systems that connected major locations across continents. The familiar surge of dimensional energy gave way to crisp mountain air and the sight of ancient buildings perched on impossible peaks. Mount Hua Sect, I muttered, taking in the view that never failed to impress me. Memories flooded back, some challenging, some wonderful, all of them significant to who I'd become. This was the place I had visited many times for Serafina's birthdays, but more than that, for training. This was where I'd forged my grade 6 art through months of grueling practice. This was where I'd truly gotten close to Serafina, where our relationship had evolved from friendship into something deeper. This was where I'd been able to forge my own path in this world, separate from the cosmic engineering that had shaped my existence. It feels different being back here for you, right? Serafina asked softly, her ice blue eyes resting on my face. Before I could respond, familiar footsteps approached across the mountain stone. The first person to greet us was my master and Serafina's uncle, Deputy Sect Leader Lee Zenith. Master. I greeted him with a respectful bow, though the formality felt strange given how much had changed since our last meeting. "Arthur, you have truly become strong," he said as he approached, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. But more than that, his eyes held something different from before. Respect and acknowledgement that went beyond the teacher-student relationship we'd once shared. For years, I had been far below Lee Zenith in strength. A promising student who worked hard but operated on an entirely different level than a true master. But not anymore. Now I was far stronger than him, operating on scales that made our old training sessions seem quaint. Before Lee could say more, his attention shifted completely as he noticed Serafina standing beside me. His entire demeanor transformed, stern discipline melting into pure uncle-like affection. "Serafina," he said warmly, opening his arms as she stepped forward into an embrace that spoke to years of family bonds. "Look at you. Every time you visit, you've grown more magnificent." "Uncle Lee," she replied with genuine happiness, her usual composed elegance giving way to the simple joy of family reunion. "I've missed you, and I've missed having my favorite niece around to keep these mountains properly beautiful," he said with the kind of gentle teasing that only family could get away with. "The ice gardens haven't been the same without your touch." He held her at arm's length, studying her face with the careful attention of someone who truly cared. "You look tired, child. This business with young Ren has been weighing on you." "It has," she admitted quietly. "But having Arthur here makes everything more manageable." Lee's eyes shifted between us with the knowing look of someone who had watched our relationship develop over years. "Good. Family should support each other, and you've chosen your family well." The casual acknowledgement of our bond, the way he included me in the concept of Serafina's family, made something warm settle in my chest. "I told you, Master," I said with a slight smile, "I would become the strongest in the world, and I'm far from finished." "Right, of course," he nodded with satisfaction. "As it should be. The path of strength has no true ending, only new challenges to overcome." His expression grew more serious. "Come, Mo has been waiting for both of you. The situation with the Kagu heir has everyone concerned." We began walking through the sect's winding paths, past training courtyards where disciples practiced forms that had been perfected over centuries. The familiarity of it all mixed with the strangeness of returning as fundamentally different people than we'd been before. The sect feels more unified than it used to, I observed as we passed groups of disciples who moved with impressive coordination. More focused. Mo's changed approach to leadership has brought significant changes, Lee explained with approval. As if summoned by our conversation about unity, a figure stepped out from one of the side paths ahead of us. Sun Zenith, Mo's adopted son, blocked our route with the kind of casual arrogance that immediately set my teeth on edge. At 27, Sun had grown into his low radiant rank power with the confidence of someone who'd never faced a truly superior opponent. His resemblance to Mo was purely superficial. Where the sect leader carried himself with dignified authority, Sun radiated petty entitlement. Well, Sun said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. The prodigal daughter returns, and she's brought her pet hero along. I felt Serafina tense beside me, her temperature dropping slightly in the way that happened when she was controlling anger. But before she could respond, I stepped forward. Sun, I said with carefully neutral politeness that carried undertones of absolute menace. Still playing the same tired games, I see. Games? He laughed, though there was nervousness in it. I'm just welcoming family home. Family? I repeated, letting just enough gray energy leak into my presence that the air around us seemed to shimmer slightly. Interesting choice of words from someone who's made it clear he considers Serafina an outsider. Sun's confidence faltered as he registered the power disparity between us. Low radiant rank was impressive by most standards, but it was nothing compared to what I'd become. I'd suggest being very careful about any ideas you might have regarding Serafina's presence here. I continued with the kind of calm that was far more threatening than shouting would have been. Because if you cause her any problems, any at all, you'll discover exactly how creative someone at my level can be when properly motivated. The threat hung in the air between us like a blade. Sun's face went pale as he processed what I just told him, understanding finally dawning that he was no longer dealing with the promising student who'd once trained here. "Of course," he said quickly, stepping aside with considerably less swagger than he'd approached with. "No problems here. Just family greetings." "Excellent," I replied with a smile that didn't soften the warning at all. "I'm sure Mo is eager to see us." We continued past Sun without another word, leaving him standing in our wake looking considerably less confident than when the encounter had begun. "You didn't have to do that," Serafina said quietly once we were out of earshot, though I caught the slight smile in her voice. "Yes, I did," I replied firmly. "Some people only understand strength, and Sun needed to understand exactly where he stands in any equation that involves you." Lee Zenith chuckled softly. "The boy has always been too fond of testing boundaries. It's good for him to encounter some he can't cross." As we walked deeper into the sect's inner areas, I continued observing the changes that Mo's leadership had brought. Disciples moved with purpose and coordination that spoke to clear command structure. Training schedules were posted prominently and followed precisely. Even the architecture seemed better maintained, with repairs and improvements that reflected pride in the sect's heritage. "Mo has transformed this place," I commented with genuine admiration. "He understands that strength comes from unity as much as individual power," Lee explained. "When everyone works toward the same goals, the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts." We approached the private areas reserved for the Zenith family, where guest quarters and meeting rooms offered more intimate settings for important discussions. But as we passed one particular path, Serafina paused with a wistful expression. "Look," she said softly, pointing toward a trail that wound up through carefully maintained gardens toward the sound of falling water. "The private waterfall. Do you remember?" I followed her gaze and felt my own wave of nostalgia. The Zenith family's private waterfall, accessible only to immediate family and their most trusted guests. I'd spent countless hours training under that cascade, pushing my limits while the icy water hammered down with relentless force. And later, during quieter moments, I'd swum in the pools with Serafina, sharing conversations that had deepened our understanding of each other. "I remember," I said with a smile that carried years of cherished memories. "That's where we swam together. And where you couldn't take the cold water," she added with gentle amusement. "Sorry I wasn't blessed to be a half-elf like you," I replied as she giggled slightly. The memories painted a picture of who we'd been then, younger, less powerful, but already discovering the connection that would define so much of our growth. Training together, pushing each other, finding moments of peace in the beauty that surrounded us. "Maybe we'll have time to visit it before we leave," I suggested, though we both knew our current mission would likely monopolize our attention. "I'd like that," she said softly. Lee cleared his throat gently, reminding us that we had more immediate concerns. "Mo is waiting in his private study. He's gathered what information we have about Ren's disappearance." We continued toward the heart of the sect's administrative center, where Mo Zenith now held court as undisputed leader of one of the Eastern continent's most powerful organizations. The boy who'd once competed with me for advancement had grown into someone whose authority was absolute and whose judgment was trusted by thousands. "Ready?" Serafina asked as we approached the study doors. "Ready," I confirmed, though part of me was still thinking about waterfalls and swimming pools, and the simpler time when our biggest concern was mastering sword techniques rather than investigating the disappearance of continental heirs. The doors to Mo Zenith's private study opened to reveal a space that perfectly balanced the authority of a sect leader with the warmth of a family patriarch. Ancient scrolls lined the walls alongside more modern communication equipment, while traditional tea settings occupied the same table as holographic displays showing sect operations. Mo himself rose from behind his desk as we entered, and I was struck again by how much he'd grown into his role. The competitive young man I'd once trained alongside had become someone whose presence commanded immediate respect, though his face lit up with genuine warmth when he saw Serafina. "My daughter," he said with the kind of paternal affection that made something in my chest tighten with appreciation. Despite the formal circumstances that had brought us here, his first concern was clearly for Serafina's well-being. "Father," she replied, moving into his embrace with the easy grace of someone who'd never doubted her place in his heart. Mo held her for a long moment, and I could see him studying her face with the careful attention of a parent who worried about their child taking on too much responsibility. "You look tired. This business with the Kagu heir has been weighing heavily on you." "I'm fine," she assured him, though they both knew that fine was relative when dealing with family crises. "Having Arthur here helps." Mo's attention shifted to me then, and his expression changed to something more formal, though no less warm. When we'd met briefly at the celebration banquet after I'd become the second hero, there hadn't been time for proper conversation. Now, in his own domain, he could offer the respect he felt the situation warranted. "Arthur Nightingale," he said with a deep bow that caught me off guard with its formality. "The second hero graces Mount Hua sect with his presence. We are truly blessed." "Mo," I replied, returning the bow with genuine respect. "The honor is mine. Mount Hua has always been a second home to me, and you've transformed it into something incredible." "Flattery from the man who defeated a calamity," Mo said with a slight smile. "I'm honored by your words, but let's speak as equals. We have serious matters to discuss." He gestured for us to take seats around a low table where tea had already been prepared. As we settled in, I noted how Mo's demeanor balanced perfectly between familial warmth and professional competence. Exactly the combination needed for someone leading both a sect and a family. "Tell me what you know about Ren's disappearance," I said once we'd observed the proper courtesies with tea. The initial reports suggested he vanished during a routine mission. Mo's expression grew serious as he activated a holographic display showing a detailed map of the eastern continent. Ren was conducting a scouting mission near the border territories between Kagulands and the neutral zones. Standard protocol: assessing any unusual activity, checking boundary markers, maintaining family presence in contested areas. "Routine work for someone of his capabilities," Serafina observed. "Exactly," Mo confirmed. "Which is what makes his disappearance so concerning. Ren isn't careless, and he's certainly capable of handling any normal threats he might encounter." I studied the map more carefully, noting the specific location where Ren had vanished. "This area, it's relatively close to Red Chalice territory." "We considered that possibility," Mo said with a nod. "But it's too far for someone at the level to pose a danger to Ren to attack him. He's strong enough that even the vampire venerables couldn't stop Heim from escaping if he wants." "What about political rivals?" I asked, thinking through the complex web of Eastern Continent power structures. With the Kagu family's current vulnerabilities, there might be factions interested in eliminating the next generation of leadership. Mo's expression shifted to something darker. "That's where things become more complicated. We received word yesterday that changes the entire context of Ren's disappearance." He paused, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Celine Kagu has awakened from her coma." The statement hit like a physical blow. Celine Kagu, the family matriarch and a low radiant rank powerhouse, had been in an unexplained coma for over 5 years. Her incapacitation had been the primary factor in the Kagu family's weakened position among the 7 superpowers. "When?" Serafina asked with sharp attention. 3 days ago, Mo replied. "The same day Ren disappeared." The timing was impossible to ignore. I felt a cold suspicion beginning to form in my mind as I considered the implications. Has anyone spoken with her? Determined what caused the coma or why she awakened now? "That's the concerning part," Mo said grimly. "Celine claims to have no memory of the past 5 years. More troubling, the family's medical specialists report that her power signature has changed somehow." The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. Alisara's recent activities, her absorption of the demon archduchess's power, her newfound ability to manipulate fantasy and reality. If she had somehow been involved in Celine's original coma, what kind of changes to her power signature? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Subtle alterations that don't match any known magical phenomena," Mo explained, as if her fundamental nature has been influenced by something external. I exchanged a meaningful look with Serafina, who clearly understood the direction my thoughts were taking. Alisara had demonstrated the ability to manipulate people's minds and memories. If she had been responsible for Celine's coma, then her awakening now, coinciding with Ren's disappearance, suggested a larger plan at work. Has Celine expressed any unusual interests since awakening? I asked carefully. Any specific people or topics she's been asking about? Mo's expression grew even more troubled. She's been asking detailed questions about you, Arthur. Your recent achievements, your current location, your relationships with various continental powers. The family initially assumed it was natural curiosity about major events she'd missed, but the intensity of her interest seems disproportionate. The confirmation made my stomach clench with dread. If Alisara had somehow influenced or replaced Celine, then Ren's disappearance wasn't random. It was bait. A way to draw me to the eastern continent where whatever trap she'd prepared could be sprung. We need to approach this situation very carefully, I said with growing certainty. There may be forces involved that operate beyond normal parameters. Agreed, Mo said, though I could see he didn't fully understand the scope of what we might be dealing with, which is why having someone of your capabilities here is such a relief. Mount Hua Sect stands ready to provide whatever support you need. The conversation continued for another hour as we reviewed tactical details and potential approaches to investigating Ren's disappearance. But throughout, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple kidnapping. As our formal discussion wound down, Mo's demeanor shifted back toward the personal. His eyes took on the kind of paternal calculation that suggested he was transitioning from sect leader to protective father. Arthur, he said with careful formality, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you while you're here. He stood and moved to an ornate cabinet against the far wall, retrieving a small wooden box that had clearly been crafted with exceptional care. The wood itself seemed to glow with inner light, and I could sense powerful enchantments woven into its very structure. What is it? Serafina asked with growing curiosity. Mo returned to the table and set the box down between us with the kind of reverence reserved for truly significant objects. A gift, he said simply, his eyes focusing on me with an intensity that made the moment feel suddenly weighted with importance. For my future son-in-law.